Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Commissioner Beasley. Let's go ahead and get started with our Planning Commission meetings.
Good morning.
Everybody ready on your side, Joe?
Yes.
Fantastic. So welcome, everybody, to the January 17th, 2023 City Planning Commission meeting. We're glad to have everybody join us for a kind of a special meeting today where we'll have consent agenda items plus a presentation from staff on the KC Spirit Playbook. Simply because we're here in a few cases, I just want to remind everyone of the time limits we do have in place. Just in case anybody forgets, that's 5 minutes for staff presentations, 20 minutes from the applicant plus questions by the commissioners. When we move to public comments, I will call on those who are in the council chambers first, followed by those who are meeting us or joining us online. And we expect the public comments to be 2 minutes when representing an individual or up to 5 minutes when representing a community association or a larger group. In all instances, please limit repetitive comments. So with that, as we get started, I ask staff to provide some ground rules and instructions as we conduct this meeting to ensure that we have minimal disruption and maximum clarity. So Joe, do you mind reminding us, please?
Sure. If you're participating today on Zoom, our participants are broken into two categories. What you see in Zoom as a panelist position consists of the city planning commissioners as well as staff that are in attendance by Zoom. And then what you see as attendees are consist of applicants or members of the public who are interested in one of the cases today. If you are an attendee when a case is called, if you're the applicant, please use the raised hand feature and we'll promote you over to the panelist position so that you can share your audio and video. When we send you the request for a promotion, you must accept it, so please do so. Same is true for any citizen who wishes to provide testimony during the public hearing. After the presentation is given by the staff or the applicant, please raise your hand. And when the chair calls the public hearing, we'll promote you over for that as well. The last thing to note, Mr. Chairman, is that the chat feature in Zoom is intended for questions about where we're at on the agenda or technical issues. It's not intended for discussing the merits of any case. That concludes my advice. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. And just so everybody knows, on the consent agenda, we'll go ahead and hear the case that's looking to be continued. Then after that, I'm going to recuse and Kokith will do the other remaining cases.
All right.
So
the first and only continuance is docket item C3, case number CPC 2022-00138. A request to approve a soccer stadium for the Kansas City Current Soccer Club at the Berkeley Riverfront Development in District MPD, generally located at Berkeley Parkway and Lydia Avenue. The applicant is requesting continuance to February 7th and staff recommends without fee.
okay, any questions by the commission regarding this docket item C3? So this is second or third time we've continued this particular case. Is February 7th enough time?
I'm going to defer to Andrew Clark, who's the staff planner on this.
The applicant did also request to February 7th. They believe they will be able to resolve any outstanding corrections by then.
Okay,
I know last time this was on the consent agenda and we pulled it off to discuss. Is that something, I just want to be the applicant to be prepared for that on the next round. What do you think, Kobe?
I believe they plan on a lengthy discussion.
Okay.
okay. Any questions, Commissioner Beasley? Okay, so at this time, let's go ahead and open it up for public testimony. If there's anybody out there that would like to speak regarding the continuance of docket item C3, please come forward or raise your hand using the Zoom feature.
Mr. Chair, there's no one in attendance in the chamber that wishes to speak and no one on Zoom has raised their hand.
All right, so we'll go ahead and close public testimony on that and I'll take a motion, please.
Chair Carl, I move to continue docket item C3 to February 7th without fee.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second for continuance of docket item C3 to February 7th. Lisa, can you take roll call on that motion, please?
Commissioner Allender,
Aye.
Beasley,
Aye.
Crowell.
Aye.
Oh, just a second. There is a quorum. I want to make sure.
We do have
Just
a quorum.
one sec. Yep. I'm sorry, Commissioner Beasley. It is Allender, Baker, Crowell,
Aye.
Enders,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Rojas,
Aye.
and Sadowski.
Aye.
Okay, so it looks like the motion passes then 6-0 for continuance to February 7th. With that, I'm going to recuse.
Thank you. Okay, Joe, will you read the remaining consent items?
Yes, I will start with C1. Case number final plat 2022-00044. A request to approve a final plat in District R 1.5 on the west side of North Platte Purchase Drive between Missouri Highway 152 and Northwest 87th Street for the Case Apartments. Staff is recommending approval with conditions. Docket items C2, case number final plat 2022-00046. Request to approve a final plat in District UR on 24 acres at Bannister Road and East 93rd Street for the Trails at Bannister Apartment Complex. Staff is recommending approval with conditions. And docket item C4, case number final plat 2022-00042. Request to approve a final plat in District MPD to create 2 commercial lots on 11 acres at the northwest corner of Tiffany Springs Road and North Platte Purchase Drive for the Twin Creeks Village Commercial Development. Staff is recommending approval of this with conditions as well. That concludes consent.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners on any of the consent docket items? Okay. At this time, we'll open it up to public testimony. If there's anyone who wants to speak on docket item C1, C2, or C4, please raise your hand.
Madam Chair, I don't see anyone in the chamber who wishes to speak, and no one on Zoom has raised their hand.
Okay, well, we'll close public testimony. If there are no questions from commissioners, I will take a motion.
Chair Hill, I move to approve docket items C1, C2, and C4 with conditions.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Lisa, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Allender,
Aye.
Beasley,
Aye.
Enders,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Rojas,
Aye.
and Sadowski.
Aye.
Thank you. It's been unanimously approved.
Okay, let's go ahead with our regular agenda item then, please, Joe.
All right, docket item 1 is case number MISC 2022-00001. Receiving from the Long Range Planning and Development staff a memo and presentation in reference to the release of all 21 objectives for the Kansas City KC Spirit Playbook. Morgan Pemberton is the staff planner. I believe that it will be presenting, but I think maybe both Mr. Williams, Gerald, and Jeff will also be speaking today.
I think on this particular case, we're hearing a presentation today on the comprehensive plan, but we will not be taking any public testimony. So just making sure I send that reminder out on that if anybody wants to comment on this, there will be a portal available, and maybe you guys can talk about that if you don't mind, as you go from there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the City Plan Commission. I'm Jeffrey Williams, Director of City Plan and Development. Thank you for having us here today and taking significant time out of your very busy agenda to review with us the work that we've all been working on, the entire community of Kansas City, for 2+ years in terms of putting together an update to the city's comprehensive plan, the KC Spirit Playbook. Mr. Chair, as you mentioned, today is a presentation. Today is the opportunity for us to go into detail about the different aspects of the work we're doing and what next steps are towards seeking adoption for the plan. As you also mentioned, after this presentation concludes, it will be placed on the KC Spirit Playbook website, playbook.kcmo.gov. Give us a little bit of time. I would say probably within 24 hours, you'll see the posting of this meeting today. And then you'll also see a box there that will allow people to provide comments directly associated with any of the information that they heard or questions they have regarding the information that we'll be sharing with you today. My job is to lead things off. As Mr. Rexwinkle introduced, Morgan Pemberton, the lead planner, Long Range Planning Preservation Department, along with Gerald Williams, who is now the division manager for our Long Range Planning and Preservation Division. They'll be providing the bulk of the presentation. We also have with us here today representatives of the consultant team that has been working with us to make sure that we're getting the maximum amount of support and engagements. That'd be members of Parsons and Associates that did a public outreach section, and you'll see background about that public outreach efforts. You'll hear from One Main Circuit. Sheila Vemmer is the lead consultant there, and she's going to actually be here at the end of this presentation to show you what this document looks like in electronic form and environment. This is a living document. It's an electronic document, and we're really relying on those features to help amplify the messaging and the access to it. And then WSP has been helpful throughout us in terms of crafting objectives, but also in terms of helping us look at ultimate metrics as we measure how we're doing as a community related to the plan and how we'd be sharing that information with stakeholders. So Morgan, if you go to the next slide, and I'm already over time, my apologies, but what we're going to cover today, an update on the overall comprehensive plan process, a public engagement summary. You will shortly receive copies of the entirety of this presentation. It will be absent that public engagement summary piece, which we can get to you, but that just will help you kind of follow along the information today. Objectives discussion, 21 objectives in the plan. And the word discussion is almost a misnomer. A lot of this is discussion. So the hope is that we will present you with a block of information. We'll pause. We will deliberately say, hey, let's stop and ask some questions about this topic. So I think kind of a give and take through it. Then we'll go and talk about the decision-making criteria, those suite of tools that are within this plan that will help decision makers such as yourselves be able to evaluate the cases and considerations in front of you based upon the criteria laid out in the plan. Global design guidelines are those things. There are elements of any physical improvement, almost regardless of type, that this plan would be endorsing be considered. Development context and form typologies, and we'll dive more into that, is that development improvements don't happen on their own. They're not at an island. There's some context around them. And this would be the portion of the plan that would go ahead and lay out how we begin to classify some of those things and how we look at the form of what we're building. Ultimately, implementation, no effort like this is successful unless elements are implemented, but also not only implemented, but measures. And then you can measure things in certain ways, but that last term really measures of success, not that growth is happening and change is happening, but how do we measure that change? And is it really the type of change that's intended? And again, through the presentation, you'll see that through this effort, there has been built a series of questions, tools, techniques to be able to do that type of measure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team. I will ask them to pass to the committee members a copy of the presentation that you passing. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Gerald Williams. Mr. Williams.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good morning, Gerald Williams, Long Range Planning Division. And you've seen this slide. We've talked about this with you all before, but for the benefit of those who may be viewing this now or later online, you know, a comprehensive plan is the long range document that guides the physical development of the city, typically over a 2-decade or so time span. It sets priorities and guides land development decisions. So it'll be used as a tool by bodies like this, the City Plan Commission, who are making decisions, recommendations about how the city develops individual development projects and things like that. It also, though, touches on many other policy areas, things like housing and livability in neighborhoods and transportation and mobility. So it is, as the name implies, a very comprehensive document. That's why we have 21 of these different objectives that you all have been reviewing the past few months. And we'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about specific ways this plan will be used by you and by others as well. And just a quick note, you know, this will be, if it's adopted, replacing the Focus Kansas City Plan, which was adopted way back in 1997. And so, as I said, if this is a 20-year time horizon for a plan, then this is overdue for an update of the city's comprehensive plan. This is our timeline, kind of broken into those 3 broad categories: inspire, engage, and enact. And we are in the enact phase. Now, we have a draft plan that's been out for public review. That's what we're here to talk to you all and get your feedback on today. And then we hope to take this through the city's adoption process in March, beginning with you all on the 21st of March, and then a city council hearing soon thereafter. So you'll see not just the objectives that we've been sharing with you, but a draft of the website, as Jeff mentioned, that where this document will live later on in this presentation as well. And I'll hand it over to Morgan.
Morning, everyone. I will be running you through some slides that give you a pretty good idea of all of the public engagement that we've been doing for the last 2.5 years now. To start off, staff spent the latter part of 2019 planning for kicking off this effort. In 2020, we had to modify our plans a little bit because of the pandemic. So we tried to be as creative as possible for all of the elements that we were utilizing, all the tools we were utilizing to reach out to the public. So starting off the process, we did a round of presentations across the city. We contacted every neighborhood group or local organization that our long-range planners often work with. We asked if we could come and present at their meetings. At that point, all of their meetings were also being held online. So we tried to just reach as many groups as we could and give a virtual presentation that the process was starting. And we would really like people to visit our website and get involved. On the right-hand side there, you can see a map of the initial presentation round that we did. You can see that it's a little concentrated there in the center part of the city, but a lot of that is because we presented to a lot of the city's commissions and a lot of other groups that are, focused downtown. So this is a representation of their physical location as far as where their meetings typically take place when they were in person. It's not exactly a representation of every community that was represented at those meetings. We also did a virtual town hall in the beginning of this process. We wanted to provide some type of big event like we would normally do in person to let people come and review some information and have conversations with the planners. So we held a virtual town hall where we had breakout rooms so people could, in smaller groups, interact with our planners, ask questions, and provide some feedback. We did a teletown hall with the local AARP chapter. We had over 1,200 listeners that joined in on that call. Jeffrey Williams and I went through some questions and answers about the comprehensive plan. Some people were able to pose some questions to us over the phone, and it was a really successful public engagement endeavor. I mean, it was the first time we'd ever done anything like that, and it was very cool. We, recorded several segments for the city's weekly report videos, and then we distributed flyers and other informational materials across the city. One of those things is the third from the left. That is an insert that we put into the water bills. We did a couple of rounds of those so that everyone received a water bill either through their email or in the mail. They also received that pamphlet. Some additional things that we did, because we did need to reach beyond what we could do online. So we put bus ads out there. Like I said, the water bill inserts. We did, in addition to these in-person things, we had social media. We tried to utilize as many of the tools that the city has as possible. Nextdoor, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those. You can see the Elf on the Shelf post that we did with Councilwoman Boo. That was a fun one. We've sent out thousands of emails as well to all the contacts that our long range division was able to put together into a database. We did print and radio ads. We targeted the local publications and the local stations, and we specifically chose out at least a couple of Spanish and English resources to try and reach a very diverse audience as much as we could. And we handed out postcards with QR codes at events. And then on the upper right-hand corner, that's one of my favorite ones that we did, is we worked with our consultants to set up these stations at local libraries all across the city so that if somebody didn't have ready internet access, they could go to a library and the librarian would guide them through interacting with us online, or they could choose to fill out some paper surveys instead. So we tried to hit both sides of both, paper, in-person traditional engagement, and also the online engagement that we really had to focus on due to the pandemic. And we also had some billboards across the city. We've got a map there at the bottom where you could see those, where they were located. All right, and so going into the public engagement where we started to get into the details of the specific policy areas that we were focusing on. The beginning of the process, all that public engagement was pretty broad. We asked very broad questions, open-ended questions, just trying to get down into the details of what the most important issues were to Kansas Cityans at this time related to physical development. From all that feedback, we created these 4 groups: visibility, mobility, livability, and serviceability. These are the strategy sessions, and we held, each of these had a handful of meetings. These meetings also, from a narrowed down policy perspective, started with broad questions and broad engagement. Every meeting was recorded, every meeting was provided online, along with the survey questions that we asked in the meeting so that people could participate in their own time online if they could. We spent the meetings, diving further into these topics and getting into more details about what people wanted to see in the plan. And then the last of these sessions for each of these categories was focused on giving the feedback back to them, letting them know what we were hearing, and then providing some draft recommendations as a sample of what they would be seeing when the final plan came out. Another public engagement activity that we did is we brought in students from the LEAD school up in the Northland. They worked with us to create some student-driven visions of what Kansas City should be in the next 20 years. They took a look at all of those strategy sessions and the topics we were covering, and they put together their own plans and what they thought the city should be doing over the next 20 years. And then they presented that to the NPD committee about a year and a half ago now, I believe it was. But that was a great activity. I think it was a great experience for the students, and it was a great experience for us to be able to work with them on that too. And in 2021, so about a year after our initial public engagement process where it was just city staff, we knew that because of the zip codes that we were seeing online, that we weren't reaching out, we weren't successfully reaching every zip code in the city that we needed to. So we brought on our consultants, Parson and Associates, in addition to Hoxie Collective and CityFi. They all joined in the effort to reach as many Kansas Cityans as possible and let them know that the comprehensive plan update was going on. The work was broken up into 3 major phases, which I'll show you here in just a second. But this map gives you an idea of the meeting locations that they have been involved with in this kind of secondary category of public engagement once they came on board. Also, all of the literature drops that has happened all over the city, and pop-up events that they have been able to attend in person after the pandemic subsided somewhat, and we could go to outdoor events safely and do paper surveying and in face-to-face conversations with people. So this is some pictures from some of those in-person events. We did 2 different paper surveys at these events. They were based on those strategy session topics, depending on which strategy sessions we're meeting over those months. We also had, lots of swag items, as we call them: pens, t-shirts, rulers, tote bags. Everyone loves a button, so we had lots of those items as well. And we intentionally focused that in-person engagement based on the zip code data that we had from the website. What were the zip codes that were not engaging with us the most online? We need to target those areas for these in-person events and make sure that if we can't reach them online, that we're getting into the communities and meeting the people where they are to have those conversations. And in addition to attending the in-person events, our consultants also helped us to widen our reach with the presentations to local organizations and neighborhood groups. Since the beginning of the process, we've given over 100 of these presentations, both in person and online. And I think that's been a really successful effort about getting out into the community and having conversations with people. So some data from the consultants' report of all of the engagement that they've helped us to do. This is going to show you for phase 1 in-person events. They did about 866 paper surveys at these in-person events in phase 1. And that would have been a survey that was based on visibility and mobility strategy session topics. We also have here phase 2 paper surveys completed. There was 194. That one was focused on the serviceability and the livability strategy session topics. And then phase 3 was the most recent phase. That phase we weren't surveying at that point because we were starting to roll out the draft plan online. And so those were really focused on just letting people know the draft plan is out there. Please review. We've got opportunities online for you to engage with us. And then also letting people know if they couldn't go online that we had the stations at the libraries and other options for in-person feedback. And then in phase three, this was also the kind of second round of those presentations to local groups. Wanted to let people know that the plan was out there and we needed to get some feedback. And they helped us to speak to over 660 attendees in the last several months at these presentations. And then some information on the surveys that were done in person by the consultants. They had 665 total responses for phase one from Kansas City, Missouri residents. And you can see the breakdown of the different sections of the city that those came from. Of course, you know, the central part of the city, that number is still elevated, but I think that doing those in-person surveys and targeting those specific zip codes we needed to hear from, we were able to even out those numbers in the engagement across the city. And then in phase two, you can also see that we have our data related to the paper surveys. And we also did some high school student surveying at that time too. So we tried to reach out to students as much as possible, the general public as much as possible, both online and in person. And then just some general stats on our website, which is where the majority of the engagement has happened. Total visits of 52,000. That includes visits just to the homepage. We kind of count those as visitors who are aware of the project. We had at least 17,000 view one additional page. Informed visitors were people who were actually visiting multiple pages, downloading some documents, watching a video. That's going to be about 5,600. And then people who actually participated in the survey and other activities, 2,800 about people online. And then contributions, so individual answers to a survey or a mapping activity. We had over 10,000 of those. We did 170 surveys with 7,900 submissions just to the surveys. The mapping activities were especially popular. We had 1,200 pins dropped on those, and those were based on various topics like transportation and housing and things like that. And 475 newsletters, which seems a little crazy looking back on it, but we sent a lot of newsletters to everyone who is registered with the site as well. So any questions or comments on the public engagement summary, we would be happy to answer.
I can start. Well, first, just, you know, congratulations. I mean, that is a lot of work. And I know that community engagement can be daunting, sometimes difficult, but the feedback that you get is, you know, so important. So I just have a couple of quick questions on the one of the things I am wondering about, you guys started public engagement before redistricting and then public engagement after. And so just wondering, you know, how do you see that being an impact in the feedback that you receive, since people tend to kind of give feedback in proximity to where they live?
I think that from the feedback that we've gathered for the last 2.5 years now, because the redistricting won't go into effect until August of this year, I think it's probably wasn't at the forefront of people's minds just yet as something that would direct their engagement one way or another. I think it's been pretty steady across the board and even possibly elevated because people were engaged with the redistricting process itself. They may have been more engaged with some of the other planning initiatives that were going on.
The next question I have is, you guys didn't highlight it, but in some of the community groups that you visit in neighborhood groups, there's language diversity. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that, how you were able to, you know, communicate and engage folks who do not primarily speak English.
Sure. We did have a lot of our informational materials translated into both English and Spanish and tried to provide both variations at all of the literature drop locations. We also had translation services that were available through our public engagement consultants. So we did have a couple of meetings that were located in some majority Hispanic communities. And I do believe Taylor can confirm for me that we did have a translator available at those meetings. She's nodding at me, yes.
And then oftentimes, not a lot, but when there are some new developments that come along, and I get really excited when the school district comes with them. And I also know that school districts often bump up against, you know, economic projects and development. So I'm just wondering, have you all thought about, we have 15 different school districts, I think, that feed into metropolitan Kansas City. Have you thought about talking to those superintendents or boards, or even, I think that's another population that are driving in and around. They may or may not live in Kansas City, but certainly there might be some feedback that they want to offer about the plan.
Sure. I can tell you just from my perspective, what I worked on, we did reach out to all of the schools. We tried to find as many contacts as possible for the superintendent's office or other communications people in the districts to help us spread the word with the students. We did at one of the counselors' school drives where they provided school supplies, we put in some informational materials into the backpacks regarding the comprehensive plan, hoping that when it made it home with the students, that the parents would also have those materials available. And as far as reaching out to the school districts in general, I might let Jeff speak on that as far as, our committees and other groups that we worked with on the plan.
Well, yes, and I'll ask the team back. I know that as part of our empowerment committee, I believe we had representation from the centers.
Mhm.
Right, from multiple school districts. So that was one thing, because it is, to your point, very important. It's not only that school districts are commenting on economic impact of projects happening in their district, it's also understanding population growth and trend. And so that really is a big part of the conversation. So because of the diversity of our districts, some districts are experiencing tremendous growth, others are experiencing consolidation. And so I think it's those individual conversations that helped. Again, to your point, the conversation about development within a school district does come up, and understanding the economics when something is proposed for some level of abatement or incentive. So deliberately there. And then as Morgan mentioned, just engaging with students, because really they are the owners and stewards of this plan beyond lots of our tenure executing the plan. So conversations had and conversation to kind of continue that way. But I think that one of the outcomes we want for the plan is for there to be an understanding about how can growth happen and how does that happen beneficially. And certainly we talk about sustainability physically, but I think economics is another big part of that as well.
And then just my final comment or question is, was there any engagement or an evaluative process around focus? I mean, did you guys look at the focus plan and say, how many times do we have projects in alignment, or we had to have waivers, or what did the community think about their neighborhood plans and the focus plan?
Well, actually, and Mr. Williams here was part of the focus effort when it was put forward, and the other Mr. Williams. And I think can speak to, we certainly had an analysis consultant come in. So Gerald, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure, yeah. So we actually contracted with Vicky Notais, who was the leader of the Focus Initiative way back in the 90s, and a former director of the planning department as well. And she did a full analysis of the focus plan to see what was still relevant, what wasn't, what had been done, what hadn't been done, and a detailed analysis of what we needed to be thinking about carrying forward into the KC Spirit playbook as well. So, and I know from experience, when we're writing these chapters, you see, we usually start with focus, and not starting from scratch in this process. It is a whole new plan, but it is rooted in a lot of those focus ideas.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, have you got, thank you again, that outreach was pretty impressive. I'd be just interested though, have we got the demographic breakdown by district on who actually participated on the website and so forth, so we know, are we getting, it looks to be the meetings look to be very concentrated in the 4th district, less in the Northland, less down south. I'd be just interested as an overall. Doesn't mean that you don't have those districts participating, but it'd be just the number of people each of those districts would be an interesting breakdown from my perspective. And then so that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question was, did you see any significant difference when you went out and getting feedback from the communities from the Northland, the 3rd and 5th to the south, compared to probably the concentration of the 4th? Were there different things that different people wanted to see as a part of the city's future or planning, across in the west side as well? But did we see any difference? And if we did, how did you actually basically analyze those? And because it seems to be just a summary of the plan is what so just interesting to see how you weighted those.
Can I add one more piece to that, a third piece? Because of the demographics, do you guys feel comfortable or confident in the results that you received or the feedback that you received from all those districts, and that it's the right plan as we move forward. Right.
Well, from my personal perspective, I'm never comfortable with the amount of public engagement we get. We can always get more. I can always have more conversations with people and reach people that haven't heard about it just yet. I think that we've maximized our abilities to the best of what we had to work with, especially regarding the pandemic and how that altered our plans a little bit. We can always reach more people, but I think that us and our consultants have done a pretty good job of maximizing our efforts. As far as the breakdown by districts, the website itself, we utilized the zip codes because that was the simplest way to get that feedback about where people were located with the tools that we had on the website. We wanted to make sure that anytime we were asking people to engage with us online, that it wasn't going to be overly complicated and it wasn't going to be too time consuming. We wanted to make sure that it was something that they could do in their busy lives. So we had the zip code question added on to the registrations and to all the surveying and things that we did online. Doing it by district, that one, we didn't have that capability online. We probably could have theoretically added a tool where someone could look up their district, but we thought that having that zip code data would be something simple, that the information they could provide, and then we could see where people were generally located. And as far as differences between feedback and different districts, I think that a majority of that I experienced would be in the strategy sessions where people let us know in some of our breakout rooms, for example, which part of the city that they lived in. And from there, you could extrapolate the comments, further out in the suburbs. A lot of the main concerns are housing. A lot of the main concerns are being able to get around the city in an effective way. And, closer to the downtown area, a lot of concerns are infrastructure that is aging, traffic issues, housing as well, but in a different kind of context. So I think that the feedback is a little bit different between the districts just based on people's daily lives and experiences and the city services they come into contact with the most. But I think there's also kind of a unifying theme across all of the districts about how they view Kansas City, how much everyone loves Kansas City, and how they want to push Kansas City forward.
So, and if I can build on the thing of kind of like unifying themes, let me build on that first and then go back to the idea about understanding where people are when they're providing comment. I mean, I think that's one of the things, that's why you want a diversity, as much broad outreach you can, different methodologies, locations, because you want to have that understanding of unique visions and opportunities, but also at the same time, by doing that, when you have those very conversations, very different ways, it is interesting to understand what things are universal and uniform and consistently heard. And so I think that's why structuring the plan around things such as global considerations. You're seeing things when we talk about broader goals or even the big 5 objectives. Those were things that we heard consistently, regardless of method at which we received the information or where someone was located. And the locational question was very interesting. Well, as Morgan mentioned, we started out really almost mandating that everybody indicate where your zip code was when you were providing comment. And the feedback we got over time is that in many ways, by being that prescriptive of it, we could be somewhat limiting in the audience of people who would be willing to participate. That by very mandating, you must tell me where you are, was somewhat felt as a limiter. And so through the process, we backed off on that. It didn't become a mandate, which certainly would let me know everybody and let us know everybody participate where they're located. It moved to being an option that somebody feeling comfortable telling us did that. If not, fine. Either way, your comment is extremely valuable. So we can do the extrapolations. And as Morgan mentioned, we did that initially to see where we were not getting as much feedback as we like. And I'll circle back. There is never, there is never enough feedback and time to do these things. I think it's measured. We take the feedback you receive and you try to find those things that are in common and move forward with some of those common elements. And then you continue to talk to people and see how you refine some of those common elements and understand, let's say something like housing is a need, but is that housing need different in different locations of the city or based upon the different context?
Yeah, the public engagement process is certainly tough and messy, and I commend the job you all did. It's very impressive. With note to the focus plan, because it was brought up, I've been trying to skim the 1,100 pages of it. Can you all share Vicky Notice's summary of what she decided, was done well, what we could build upon? That'd be awesome. Thanks.
I do have a quick, I'm curious, when you did the students, what was their vision a lot different from what you saw just going out into the other outreach? So where did the students see the vision of Kansas City going? I'd be really interested to see what their thoughts were.
I think that they probably had a bit more of a, I don't know, futuristic is the right term, but their thoughts about how to address homelessness, how to address food shortages in areas where they don't have the resources or access to healthy foods. Those kinds of things, I think they were much more creative about the solutions that they were putting forward, things that may not be, feasible exactly right now, financially, or, just the physical infrastructure that we have to, address these issues. But it was very cool to interact with them and to hear their ideas and to see their kind of futuristic vision of the city that they wanted to live in. And it was also really important to have those conversations because we need to know what kind of city they wanted to live in. We need to retain as many of our residents as we can moving forward. And it was very interesting to hear, what kind of city they wanted to live in. And a lot of their feedback is still similar to their parents as well. Concerns about the roads and being able to get around the city and things like that. So you did see, reflections of the feedback we're hearing from the general population, but I liked their very futuristic and creative ideas that they had for addressing some of the issues that we're dealing with.
Were they captured in the plan? I'm just interested in maybe thinking outside the box. They're not in the everyday living and realities, but it'd be just, how did you capture that in the plan?
I think that we capture that in the general 20-year outlook that we have. We don't want to restrict ourselves as far as the solutions that we could find to address some of the problems that we're looking at. And honestly, some of the research that they did for their projects, it introduced us to a couple of new tools that may be theoretical right now for addressing things, but that could potentially be something that could be looked at.
But it sounds like, Commissioner, what we could do is maybe break out that feedback specifically, I guess, through the North End Chamber, and then understand where that feedback directly led to one of the shaping of the community supported actions of the plan.
Mm-hmm. It's just as a follow-up to that, what problems they were most interested in solving, even if the solutions might not be something we could do today, but these homelessness or those kind of equity centered issues. I'm just curious where they felt the priorities were on them.
Yeah, they were very knowledgeable about the issues that we're facing right now that you'd see in the news a lot. I think homelessness at that time was definitely something they saw. Sustainability and climate change was a major issue that they focused on in the proposals that they were putting forward. And also the interconnectedness of those different priority areas. So how can you address homelessness, food deserts, and climate change all at once? You have an sustainable and energy efficient building where you can provide affordable housing. You can also have indoor food production, and just seeing kind of the intersection of how they were thinking about these issues was really interesting too.
Just curious, Commissioner Beasley, any questions?
Thank you. Tyler touched on the one I had interest in as to how successful Focus was in leading change. I was glad to hear that they did reach out and have that researched.
Okay, thank you. I think we all can agree there's a great exhaustive effort to reach out and try to engage the public as much as possible. I mean, you can obviously put out a lot of information. Sometimes it's a little difficult for people to respond back. They're just a little afraid maybe of their voice, but I really like the theme of, I think everybody loves Kansas City. And I agree with that. No matter what part of the city you live in, everybody loves it. And I think it's because the diversity is one. If you want to live in a dense area, you can. If you want to have a little area that's got room to raise chickens and cows, we've got that too. And everything in between. So I think that's what makes Kansas City great.
And Mr. Chairman, if you find, we might use that as the ability to segue to talk about the plan and how it covers all those diverse physical environments that we have here. And my last plug, public engagement still goes on. Please comment. We're getting detail, but now we need even more engagement on those very detailed and specific recommendations.
Yeah, I think once people see some stuff in writing and actually what it's all about, you may find that you get a little bit more input at that particular time.
What we're counting on.
And I'll do one last plug. All the objectives in their draft form are at playbook.kcmo.gov. We have a survey attached to each page for people to provide feedback. They can always just email us directly at playbook@kcmo.org. And we also have 3 public meetings that are coming up in the coming weeks where we plan to hold them as an in-person and an online meeting, also providing opportunities online for later if people are not able to attend at that moment. But yeah, engagement continues.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so a little bit of a precursor before we dive into your comments on the objectives that you've been reviewing over the past few months. Just a quick reminder about the overall structure of the plan, because what you've been looking at is just the objectives, more or less. There are other pieces to the plan, and we want to kind of remind you what that structure is and how those pieces all fit together. Starts with the vision statements, and these are all on the playbook.kcmo.gov website as well. But the vision talks about what we want to be in the future. It describes a future state, a future city, and it expresses what we believe in, what our values are as a community. The goals get a little more action oriented. They talk about what we need to achieve to get to the vision. And then we have 10 of those goal statements. We'll talk about those in a little while. And then we have 21 objectives, and that's where all of the recommendations reside. That's what you all have been reviewing the last few months, since October or so, since we've been releasing those objectives in groups of 4 or 5 at a time. And now we have all 21 of them out there. Our hope is that you have been able to review those over the past few months and have some comments on them. We've grouped them by those 10 goals we talked about. So instead of having 21 individual conversations today, we're hoping we can have 10 conversations. And then we'll talk about our implementation later, a little more detail as well. But essentially the implementation matrix in the chapter and the tools embedded in that chapter talk about how we implement these things. When does it happen? Is there a cost associated, and generally how much is the cost? And then some metrics to talk about how we measure success as well are all in that implementation chapter as well. So next slide. So this is our big ideas, our 5 big ideas for the plan, and they go with the vision statement as well. I won't spend a ton of time here because I know we're a little bit over time, but it talk about maximizing connections and mobility options, creating a physically beautiful city, respecting land as a limited resources and promoting sustainable growth, creating a future-proof city by better anticipating and reacting to emerging trends and new technologies, and then creating neighborhoods that accommodate all ages, lifestyles, and incomes. So those are kind of the 5 big ideas of the plan, and they go with, as I said, that vision statement, guide all the recommendations within it. These are our 10 goals. I won't read them, but again, we'll talk about each of these 10 goals and the objectives that are most closely related to each of them as we walk through your. And then the 21 objectives, and this is where all the recommendations are, what you've been reviewing for the past few months, but you haven't seen all of the objectives yet. These shapes here and outlined in red are pretty much what we put up for your review. There are additional pieces to those objectives, that the context, it talks about data and mapping that about each objective and where we are now and things we might want to track in the future to measure progress or success. What are the benefits of implementing this particular objective? So those measures of success, the context, the data and the mapping and the benefits are all things that we're working on and will be providing very soon to you all again to review as. But wanted to get those recommendations out there to you all to react to and get some feedback on, because I think that's important conversation to have. So with this slide, as I mentioned, we'd like to begin to have a conversation with you all about your feedback on those draft objectives and the recommendations within. Grouped those objectives by the 10 goals. These are our first 2 goals: sustainable and equitable growth and quality design. Unless Jeff or Morgan have anything additional, and I think we would like to put it up to your comments, questions, and feedback for us, and have a dialogue with you. We can start with the development patterns objective, or anyone. Jeff.
And if it's helpful, again, just if you have questions about when we're using a phrase, development patterns, what does that mean? Again, you're also beginning to see some of the imagery that somebody will begin to see on our website as well. So trying to use color, so that teal color again are those 10 goals. And you'll start to see the goal cards with white lettering. Those are the individual objectives. So I would share that out there as well. And again, so maybe what will be helpful as well, maybe if it's helping to spur some questions, maybe we can go through all of the 10 of them. So we're seeing them in a unit, and then we can go back and you can ask about how one thing relates to another. It's tough. This is a kind of a system we've gotten ourselves used to.
I see it.
So we kind of grouped these by the objective that's most closely related to that goal. These objectives are related to several goals, you know. So this is just the most closely related objective for each goal. So we've kind of paired up development patterns with sustainable and equitable growth. We've paired up quality development and public spaces with quality design goal. Next slide. Community development and revitalization and complete community paired up with our strong and accessible neighborhoods goal. Our environmental health and resiliency and public health objectives, we have paired up with our healthy environment goal. Our access to jobs and business attraction objectives, we paired up with diversity and goal rather. Our displacement mitigation and affordable housing, housing affordability and diversity objectives, we paired up with environment for young people. We have several here related to connectivity. These are our objectives that relate primarily to the mobility discussion we had with the public. So connected city, movement of goods, parking and Vision Zero, public transit ability, all are part of that connected city goal. And then parks and open spaces actually aligns rather nicely with our parks and open spaces goal as well. History, arts, and culture goal is matched up with our city attractions, our historic preservation objective. Smart city goal is aligned with our smart city technology. So we were hoping to kind of structure the conversation according to those blue headings on each slide. Starting. And if there are no comments on these, we can just skip by them.
Or also starting any place you like. We showed them the system. So if something is just naturally, please come that there's no right or wrong order to it. Your feedback's what we're seeking.
This was a question I'd posed previous time, and a little bit of level setting for me. So I have tried to just do some quick Google searching on comprehensive plans and get a better understand of, you know, why we create them, what they're for, who's it for, how do they get used, et cetera. And most of what I've found is this extensive process, but less of the how or less of the why. And so it has the how and the what. And it's like, so again, it feels as though for me, we're diving into this process, which I think you all have done a very, very good job with. And if you could help level set for me about why, again, it's kind of like, who is this for? If we had to put this on a continuum of aspirational versus realistic, if we have to put it on a spectrum of how budget conscious should we be and resource conscious versus idea focused, if you could kind of contextualize those things for me, that would be very helpful as a first step. And then I'm happy I have a handful of notes that I would love to go through on these specific objectives.
I'll start off, and I'm sure Morgan and Gerald will have more to add. So the audiences, let's start there. And I think one of the things you'll see as we lay out this plan is a recognition that this document, this plan has many different audiences. We'll start here, the audience with you or anybody that's serving on a city focus board, land use board, that this is a roadmap. And this is about aspiration. You know, this is a policy. It's not a rule. It's not a guide. It's not a law. It's a policy. It's to help bring together what could be the very different and broad numbers of objectives of any city to grow responsibly. So that's what this is to do as a tool. And as people begin to make individual decisions, they're making it on some collective thinking and thought about the future of the city. But it's a tool, obviously, for the elected officials who then go and look at how the city's resources are going to be allocated. It's a tool for somebody who's actually making the physical change themselves. You know, none of us here, unless we're filing that building permit or getting that approval, are actually doing the physical building themselves. So it's an idea for someone who's coming to make an improvement to understand what the values and the priorities of a community are, and what is the community's physical ability to be able to accommodate the type of development that somebody is proposing. So there's a whole host of audiences there.
Thank you. I want to jump in there. So if we were looking as a city about where to invest in infrastructure, like that makes a ton of sense to me. What I'm curious to know, and maybe contextualize via focus or other cities' plans, if, for example, it's a big data center, whether it's a spec center or whether it's an actual company coming in to build it for themselves, is the goal, of course, would be that they also use this context. And I'm curious, just because I don't know this world, is it often that economic factors indicate where they end up plopping down and saying, this is where we're going to build this development because we like this highway or we like the location here? Or do developers look at the focus plan first to try to figure out, or do they talk to people who are informed by the focus plan to figure out where they should go?
I would like them to do all three. It'd be good for them to do all three simultaneously. I mean, they're, excuse me, they're economic factors and reality to all things, but there's also a vision and an understanding where a community sees things happening and being placed. So it's all of those things. It's great when they happen simultaneously. It can be a challenge when one aspect gets focused on, then you go back. The economics, you know, say that this is where project X should be located, but the community saying, no, it should be located in a very different place. Looking at those things in isolation and sometimes saying, well, community wants something, project X located in an alternate location, but if there is no practical or realistic market to have that happen. So you do those things simultaneously with as much pre-thought in terms of what community is looking for. But it also doesn't mean that this is a thought and happens. It doesn't mean that we'll adopt this plan and we won't ask people any more questions, because this is a 20-year plan. So things that will make a lot of sense to focus in and look at in 2023 may make absolutely no sense in 2043. So that's why it's a continuum. It's a plan that it's an oft-used phrase. It's a living document. So one of the things we find here, how are we measuring success? We told somebody to put something somewhere. Did that have the positive intent we had, or were there repercussions that we didn't necessarily understand? So it all happens kind of as a system. Yeah, this is aspiration. You asked about aspirational versus realistic. But I feel lots of people who are coming in here looking to do physical development are aspiring to something of their own. So there is a lot of that. And then the reality, other pieces come into the other jobs that we as city have to do to make sure that any physical development happens is something that we can provide appropriate use services to, and is being built safely and is happening in accordance with what others around them think should be happening. Budget versus idea. I think what you'll find when you get to the implementation section, this is not at a level of capital plans. We recommend this change. It'll happen in this dollar amount. No, we're saying that globally, conceptually, people said this is something we really should focus on and consider. Sometimes they'll talk about prioritization, maybe do more of something in one location and lesser of another, or at least have that conversation about budget and idea. And it's very much something that is, something that comes at a lesser cost, medium cost, or something that's going to be a very aggressive. It's going to take a lot of effort to maybe raise the capital, have something to happen. And I think you've experienced with the board and commission, it's the range of projects you see. Someone's looking to do a pretty small scale commercial residential development. Some things that are reviewed and vetted here are large infrastructure investments like KCI. So it really all ranges.
Thanks for that. So as I try to comprehend this, I love the idea of having a comprehensive plan. I think that it makes a lot of sense. I've been continually trying to think about this in like a human-centric design format. And so as I was trying to go back through focus, I was trying to figure out of these, 1,100 pages, who goes into that and how do they go through it? What are they looking for? What makes it really, really applicable for them? And so I think most of, civic servants probably aren't diving into it the way that we all would like based upon the amount of effort that goes into it. And then in terms of development, I think that that's also, I don't think developers are necessarily diving into it the way that we would like. So I was trying to figure out, I love these tiles and the different objectives because they're so easy to understand and communicative. And I was trying to understand, if there's so many audiences, how do we make it useful for the audiences that we intend? Because I think my biggest critique, if I were to be super harsh and black and white about it, would be that it's an academic exercise and it's too robust for anyone to really get their arms around and feel like they can make it useful to them. And so I think that would be my challenge to you all as you lay this out, of figuring out how you can, whether it's a city staffer, whether it's an elected official, whether it's a design firm or a developer, kind of helping them figure out the ways that they should navigate this beast of a document and a plan. So that way it's contextualized in a way that they aren't intimidated by the amount of it, so that it is more useful.
So we're creating that very thing. We're developing what we're initially calling a user's guide that would have simple questions or statements like, I am a developer, I am a neighborhood resident, I am an elected official, I'm an appointed official. And then it would have some guidance about how this document applies to you or what you're trying to do. Maybe list some common uses. If I'm a neighborhood resident, I'm applying for a PIAC request, or I'm disturbed about the potential development in my neighborhood, or something like that. They'll give them some guidance about where to look in the plan for what it says about that particular topic. And so that'll be a piece of the document that specific users use it.
And a lot of this is time. Focus would potentially feel a lot less daunting if it was developed in 2023, but it was developed 30 years ago, practically. And so not working here in Kansas City, I was back in Yonkers, New York, and I was very proud of my CD-ROM, high tech, of the focus plan that had made my desk. That was the emerging technology at the time to try to break it down. And so that's where time makes a huge difference. We have tools at our disposal. And actually the best thing is everybody, or good numbers of people, have tools at their disposal to really be able to customize how they use the document. So just as we talk about scenarios from a physical development perspective, we're looking to build out scenarios in terms of audience, who is using the plan and why. And I think we'll build that out over time as we have the document adopted and starting to use it. But again, we're focused, definitely revolutionary in terms of how it engaged public, how it assessed neighborhoods, how it actually used the word equity. It was one of few plans that even did that and started talking about redevelopment pattern. We felt a great deal of responsibility here to move this city's comprehensive plan to that next level. How do we address multiple audiences? How do we make it interactive? And I appreciate that the comments about easy to understand and communicative. How do we even leverage just the graphic resources that were not available back in 1997 to really have all those things happen? And that's where we rely on the end users to tell us, I get some of it. Can you tweak some things so I can have even more access to the tool? Because this is comprehensive plans are mandated documents that cities need to have to manage growth and development. So this is not an optional. This is what everybody has to have. We want to know that our tool is reflective of a very diverse environment where we want to have lots of different people who contribute to the development process, have a tool and some understanding of global expectation about the benefit and quality of physical improvement in the city.
And I will mention real quick, we're going to show you a couple examples of the final product website that we're building towards, but we specifically chose the platform that we did for the final product because it allowed us to be very creative and a little bit forward thinking on how we can make this as user friendly as possible, utilizing glossary tools, making it visually interesting and something that people can scroll through quickly. And if they want to, they can do a deep dive, but they can get, you know, the information they need and navigate around the site as easily as possible. So it's all things we're keeping in consideration.
Yeah, thank you all very much. I'll add two more global thoughts and then let others jump in, and I won't get into specifics. Global thoughts would be the way I reviewed this was I was thinking about what can be taken out. If you try to take out as much as possible of this and leaving just the best stuff, that's so just to contextualize it, that's kind of the way I went through this. I think there's a lot of phenomenal stuff in here in terms of cost and in terms of ROI. And I don't know how you measure that, but maybe it's the measurables you all are going to share. That also I think would be helpful since if I look at like parks alone and the idea of the city identifying where open space is needed. And I mean, that alone would be a crazy cost. And so I think what would be interesting in this is if you all somehow were able to share your priorities, because I understand the aspiration of it as, hey, this is a great direction to head. And I think for me, what would make this even stronger is adding and as you head this direction, here are the things that are going to be the easiest to achieve or have the greatest return, et cetera. Thanks, everyone.
I have a few global comments, if I can use that term. And I've been trying to be thoughtful about them because I said, if I don't show up here next week, it's not because I voluntarily resigned, but it might be because of these comments. I mean, one, I think for me, from my own personal experience, I've wanted to see this body have some really serious conversations with the council and the mayor. It is very frustrating to me when we do the due diligence and the work that these like proposals come before us. We do not recommend them, only for them to go to the council and a council member or someone else in that structure, you know, go ahead and approves the plan. I think when I think about like, if we all are going to take it serious, then let's all take it serious. And this is our comprehensive plan. But if it is, you know, that only the planning department is taking it serious and then others are just like, you know, waiving the plan and the objectives, I think that that's a conversation we need to have. So that's one. The second thing I would say is just from a like community neighborhood level, as I look at the 21 tiles or objectives, I'm thinking about those 18 area plans and I'm asking myself, where do these are they red, yellow, green in terms of that area plan? Are you doing sustainable and equitable growth well, but quality design is, you know, so like some kind of way that a neighborhood plan or area plan can evaluate how it is around these 21 objectives that you have so that people know, hey, we need to lean in on this or we need to make our voice heard. One of the another tension point that I have is that our purview only allows us to look at land use and zoning and if a project is within the permissible scope, right? But oftentimes we can look at a project and even though it meets the regulation, it's not good for the community, it's not good for the neighborhood. So when I look at development patterns and I'm thinking, for example, like DP 13, which says develop and utilize tools to help evaluate future development proposals, I'm looking for some kind of rating that says, yes, you meet the qualifications of using this plot of land in this way, but no, this is not in alignment with our goals, where we want the city to go, or even with the neighborhood plan that said. And I think it makes it makes it difficult because on one hand, you know, stick to the rules, think about, you know, what the city planning commission can do, but also neighborhoods are expecting us to be here to advocate and to listen to them. And that puts us in a very unique position. So what I'm looking for as we go through these is where does the policy and the regulation, where can it overlap? Another example of that I often get frustrated about is the number of gas stations that come into the urban core. Those do not meet the neighborhood plan. It's not what they asked for, but this use has been zoned for that. And then we have some neighborhoods where they have more gas stations than they have like other commercial, like grocery stores or, you know, like service oriented areas. And so when I think about this plan, it doesn't want a neighborhood that's connected to gas stations. It's talking about livability and mobility and connectivity. And so just as you all are thinking about that, I think back to like, how can this body, how can I as a commissioner lean into not only uphold the codes and the regulation and the zoning, but also think about how I can live up to what this plan aspirational is asking me to be. And for many times there's a gap.
If I can, I provide comments to you, Commissioner Hill, as with Commissioner Enders as well, because there's some common themes there. One of the things mentioned is kind of understanding where this plan sits in totality with all of the other policy documents the city has. And so if people haven't had a chance to go to our department's website, one of the things that we've done as part of this process is indicated, to your point, all of the other city policies that need to be supportive of this plan and interact with this plan. So if you go to that website now, you will see, and I'm giving you an estimate, I think it's between 15 and 20 different documents that we recognize has relationships to this plan. So it's the major street plan, it's the community health plan, it's a whole host of other documents where one of the outcomes that we want to have as part of this updating of the comprehensive plan is giving the city a tool where we're putting all of our policy documents and we're kind of keywording all of those. So if you type in the word, I'll pick historic preservation because it came to mind, you'll see policy guidance not only out of this comprehensive plan, but you'll see what we talk about in any other supportive documents. So these concepts are not in isolation and only for your board to consider. How do all those things relate together? So understanding where it's good for this plan to lead the way. But I think Commissioner Enders, you talk about, I want more specificity and detail on things. And I guess because I know the Parks Department right now is in the process of doing an updated master plan or comprehensive plan for itself. So the comprehensive plan may talk about the appropriate proportioning of open space, but then we know that there's some support underlying effort and hey, go see the Parks master plan. It's got even more of that detail. So I think understanding how the comprehensive plan is that umbrella and a system for some of those other policy documents. As it relates to area plans, one of the the implementation pieces after the adoption of this plan is to go back and take a look at, okay, how do we need to look at those 18 area plans? Are there things that we need that the comprehensive plan is now saying happens globally and universally in all area plans? So it will let the area plans begin to, as they get updated, dive more into specifics and more into the context of that area. So that's another big part of this work as well. We put our area plan work on hold. So for anybody who's not familiar, 18 broken up into 18 area plans, the comprehensive plan is a bigger framework. And you could say we've not touched our comprehensive plan in 25, 30 years, but we've gone about the work of updating those 18 area plans and making sure they are up to date, no more than 10 years old. That's their lifespan. So we paused, but now we know once we get a comprehensive plan, we're going back those area plans, but now we're going back with an updated comprehensive plan and making sure those area plans are focused in the way that are most assistive to neighborhoods. And I'm just going to mention neighborhood leaders before I forget them because I mentioned every other stakeholder, but we have an amazing neighborhood leadership network here. So that's some of our growth next work after this. How do we make those area plans more responsive? And then ultimately, I mean, the ideas and suggestions that come out of here, we talked about the comprehensive plan linking back to other planning documents and area plans. Ultimately, it's the foundation of what we would change from a raw city code and zoning perspective. Within the past year, you've considered changes in zoning that's dealt with things that the comprehensive plan talks about, more housing options through ADUs, understanding and being able to better shape development through infill development, conversations you've got on your table about coming soon, tree preservation, other kinds of things. So it's a document that needs to broadly inspire. It needs to be supportive of other city policies. But at the end of the day, it's also something to be leveraged, that if there's something that community and everybody's saying is a must do, that then it migrates over into that regulatory framework that the city has.
Can I jump in with a question? You brought up, so there are about, like, I have 100 favorite community supported actions in here. There are some really great ones. You talked about integration with other documents. One of the things that I struggle with as I read some of those community supported actions, some of them I absolutely want them to happen. Like, there's something in there about integrating so that if someone puts in their information for one department, that through APIs, it's going to talk to other departments. And now you don't have to submit things 10 times because the city's going to keep track of your information. So if it's a mobility plan or transportation plan, and that's one of the 15 to 20 that this needs to integrate with, you all kind of have a little bit of ability to make those two interact. On the ones that leave your, sphere of influence, how should we view those? Because I want so many of those to be implemented and to happen, but I fear I just read them as if, like, there's no way this is actually going to happen. How much can you all write something that's going to influence different departments in different parts of the city and not feel that you're just kind of shouting good ideas into the void?
Well, again, this very process and all of our staff reports and actions and recommendations that come to you would be based upon this document. And that is the obligation of other city departments as well. So people are coming here, and I guess as you were kind of looking at me to react to, that you'd have a thought or response at, but we'd want to make sure we have the strongest framework in place that's accessible to all those decision makers or people providing comments, this body, elected officials, others. And a lot of that, the degree upon which some of that is looked at, comply with, the outgrowth of that, I think, are actual ordinance and recommendation. Now, if it's the feedback from City Plan Commission saying that what may be something be helpful for you to look at those things, or you see recommendations and putting a dot, I think from my perspective, we really should look at that one and making that something that is more mandatory versus aspirational. I think that can be the role of a City Plan Commission. Again, it's providing that guidance. It's a heads up to others that's saying, we really think that from our perspective, this is a priority. Just like people who participated in the plan said, there are 100 different options, but this is the priority for my community or my constituency.
I view where I got lost in the document is I didn't read the 100. I don't know whether I've skimmed the complete 1100, but certainly had a look at each of the files. What I got lost in is, I think we are at the first stage. It's really aspirational. This is what we're getting feedback from the community. I suppose I've been through too much change management in my life, but if you go through the steps, you've got to basically look at the aspiration, then prioritize what you really want to happen, and once you actually get those priorities, what is then the infrastructure that we need to build to be able to influence the development where we want to develop? Good example, we've seen data centers up north. Why? Because the infrastructure supports those. We've seen large storage facilities down south. Why? Because there's an intermodal down in Gardner, probably. So the development is, I don't think they're looking at a comprehensive plan and said, hey, that's where we want to put it. They're just going in and saying, this is where the infrastructure supports my development, and this is the most cost-effective way to get it done. So I think we've got to get to prioritizing what we want from this plan to happen first, so we can actually then, that then plays into what are then the policy changes that we need to make once we prioritize what we want to go first, and then that'll actually influence then the funding and the infrastructure and other things like that. The other thing I didn't read, and maybe you're going to have it in the implementation part of the presentation, is, if I have a look at other communities right now, especially around sustainability, equitable growth, circular economies are looked at pretty seriously, and was working on looking at how those circular economies would come in, driven by green infrastructure at some point in time. So the idea is that you not only do the capital investment, then you've got a way to sustain that growth through circular economies, job growth, and that gets into then more social equity, so forth, because that's where job growth is potentially going to come from. So that's what for me was missing in. I think we're really great. We've got the feedback on the aspiration. Maybe this is where we want to go. Now, what are the priorities? And that's what I missed reading through the document is number of goals in each of those tiles, but I don't know which one are we going to attack first.
I can say that when we have the implementation matrix more fully put together, and we'll be bringing it to you for final recommendations to council, that implementation matrix will have that prioritization element to it. We'll be able to identify those things that we can accomplish more in the short term, and also those, maybe some of those long-term projects that might be harder for us to get up off the ground, but it is more important that we start now so that we can start to tackle those big issues. So prioritization will be an element of the implementation matrix, and we'll be sure to have that information for you.
And I'm at right now, the time is of the essence, because we're in a situation where we've got funding that is never been seen before within the US on infrastructure and so forth. That's only going to last for maybe another 5 years, maybe. If we need to be able to say, here are our priorities, and I'm sure the council's working on them and the city staff are working on them, but we need to be really focused on how we get the most money out of the Jobs Act, ARPA, everything else that they've got coming down right now to at least start some of these plans. If we spend another 3 or 4 years trying to prioritize where we are, we're going to lose an opportunity, a generational opportunity in the city.
And that is a challenge in putting together any long-term multi-year plan, in that the idea of, to your point, prioritizing things, understanding what relates to the other, but then also being nimble and flexible and having a reasonable set of goals when a unique opportunity presents itself. And you indicated unique opportunities presented themselves. And what I was taking away from your comments was kind of looking at when there was stimulus package in the late 2000s. And the idea is like, hey, where are you at with some things that are just shovel ready? What do you know that if somebody gave you a pot of money, you'd be able to clearly say, this is the community's vision of it, and this is where we'd locate it, and this is how we would do it. And that's always going to be a challenge with a plan of this length and term, but do we have the right, you're asking, we have the right framework pieces enough to begin to have those conversations? And Morgan, and I know we're way delayed in time, but this is really great. We appreciate this. Can you go to one of the goals that had job attraction and go back one. So, I mean, this is how we begin to, I just pull that one there, but I think that's where some of the broader concepts come together. I mean, diversity and opportunity, but again, so access to jobs, job retention, how does that relate back to infrastructure investment, support other areas of sustainability? So those are some of the relationships. So, and we would welcome you all helping us kind of craft those areas you see as relating to one another from your perspective about how we as a city would prioritize making significant investment.
And I don't want to give the impression that we are just sitting here making the prioritization decisions for all the city departments and regional agencies that we work with. We've been in close contact with Mark, all of our other regional agencies we work with, and the plans that we also work within, in addition to all of our city departments, making sure they have input.
We want this document to help provide a framework for somebody to begin to prioritize things in an equitable way.
Mhm.
You can prioritize things to the benefit of a person or a sector, but how are you having those priority conversations with some common core goals and objectives to make sure that the benefit can be as widely felt and appreciated as possible? So if this document, and I feel this department and what we do, a lot of our work is about how do we set up those conversations to try to get consensus around priority. And a comprehensive plan, being visionary, being out there, helping set that framework for those future priority conversations is a huge reason why this document needs to be up to date and robust.
One of the things that I noticed is just that maybe I was aware, but just this document helped elevate it for me is transportation. I mean, its role and ability to have connectivity in the cities, whether it's complete communities or access to jobs or business and attraction and retention, connected cities. You think about affordable housing. We often hear of projects that come before us around workforce housing now. And so, but I also am aware just from other conversations on how disconnected it is. I mean, we hear people are talking about this one moment for the draft, but then actually where's the sustainability in it and where is the connectivity or the infrastructure? So that's something that I think as I've just high level gone through these, like that transportation is a piece. And I think I have just a legal question and maybe just clarify for me. So I like to get in trouble, but I'm wondering like, are we allowed to advocate during the budget hearings for the department, like as commissioners?
Yeah, sure. Yes, you'd be allowed, just like any other resident citizen, to appear before any council meeting and advocate. Sure.
And are we allowed to, if this plan is presented to the council or different parts of it, are we allowed to give testimony there? Or do we have to like then somehow recuse ourselves here later based on comments made?
No, I mean, once the commission has made its final decision on a matter, you're allowed to discuss it. The ex parte rule only applies before you've decision.
So for example, if one was to say, hey, this plan is coming up and it's talking about, I don't know, connected cities or complete communities. And we often see this type of development. I personally don't believe that it is in line with the plan, with our comprehensive plan, with the area plan, with the neighborhood plan, but the land use zoning and codes allows for this type of development. Let's say I don't name that development, but then when I come here and that type of development comes, does that put me in any tension if I make public comments around? If I say neutral, like this type of development, not ABC development.
I think it could. I mean, I certainly think a development attorney could raise that argument.
Right. I'm just looking for the line so I don't cross it, because for me, when I think about this plan, and certainly listening to the commissioners, and some of them are way deeper into your lane than I am. But I often see that there is just a lack of communication between what I hear elected officials say they want, because oftentimes, like now, we're in the season when people are running for office, communities are coming and saying, I want these things. They say, I will deliver these things, more affordable housing, more bus stops, the streetcar expansion, whatever it is, right? And then they get here and we believe that we know. I think for my council and other council districts, I rely a lot on Kobe when we talk about the Northland, because I just don't have that kind of lived experience with what is needed. But what I'm thinking about is when we come here and we are making a decision as a body based on hearing neighborhood, based on what we can, and then we're completely overruled. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do we close that gap if you all are presenting to the council, if they are saying this is the kind of development they want, and yet we keep seeing development get approved that doesn't meet the plan, quite frankly. And I think that's where some of us have this lack in trust in the plan. It's like,
I think you should, if there's a case you feel strongly about, you should go to council and
yes.
testify.
But then, then it becomes, we get back here and it's like, you cannot do that.
But
because
if we've either recommended denial or approval, I think at that point, if you feel strongly about it and anticipate that some council members are going to take a differing perspective for any reason, I think it is appropriate for you to go and voice why you feel so strongly about it.
My takeaway from your comments, because I don't think the law department can tell you right, wrong, yes, no. But I think the takeaway is for this document is how can we, because you're another stakeholder group, you're another audience, how can we craft guidelines, suggestions, thoughts about talking about things in their totality versus talking about things one at a time? And there's a difference between talking about Project X and talking about the city's major street plan, for example. I just bring that up. And I think that's some work that we can do and craft. So when this plan gets adopted, you begin to have that roadmap for yourselves to answer that question. It's a very valid question. It can depend on circumstance and individual, but in individual proposals or considerations, but globally, how does this body use this tool and in what ways to advocate, support the recommendations of this plan? I think the relationship in terms of this committee with elected official, I think that's another dynamic, a different dynamic. I'll be quite clear, but that happens in a different forum, but through different type of conversations. But this document, as end users, as this commission and body, understanding how you could best use it to promote the achievement of as many of these objectives as possible. I think that's something we would work as a staff piece. And we would be doing that in concert, honestly, with our law department and others, because we'd want to give you a roadmap that is not fraught with challenge. But also, things come to different groups and bodies for different reasons and different takes on things. And I know that's not always the most comforting answer. But I want there to be clarity for this plan, how you really use it as a tool.
And I appreciate that, because that's what I think I'm looking for. I certainly understand we're a recommending body, right? And there's an approval body, and there are a lot more factors at play than even I have the vantage point of looking at when a development project comes. I'm looking for how can I show up here in a way that says, hey, if this is allowed to consider, maybe this is a regulatory change that needs to be made, or yes, this is policy, or there's just a gap between the aspirations. So like if I look at parks and open spaces, I understand that you have this recommendation from the comprehensive plan, and then there's the Parks Department. And I think about when you talk about equity, if I look at the boundaries of just the Kansas City Public School District, there are no Chuck E. Cheese, skating ring, monkey business, any other place that you can go to celebrate birthdays like you might see in other communities. It just isn't there in the development. So parks are super important to those families. And so if you have a park and it doesn't have a shelter, or the water is not running, or, like that is like from equity. And so when we see these things, I'm just trying to figure out how do we align in a way that not only I can serve this well, but then also educate the community on what their advocacy needs to be. Because oftentimes it's not showing up here that you need to be showing up in some other meetings.
And picked up, and the thought that came to mind actually was understanding with our PIAC process, that is a publicly oriented process for community to come and say what they're looking for. And I've told numbers of people in this room, not to this body, one of the happiest moments I've had in working here in the city was going to a Saturday morning PIAC meeting where I saw a resident with a very tattered copy of an area plan and saying, you know what, I'm here because I support this project. And why do I support this project? Because my area plan said that this is something we should do. Now that is how a document helps to advocate for position. And the person was at the place, they were at the money place. They were at the budget conversation. They were at the policy conversation. So that's how and why these schools can be very important, and really to put them, and I love when somebody takes them and in a sense makes them their own. They use them as a foundation for stating a position or prioritization. That is what these documents do and should do for everyone. I'm going to totally stop there because this is, and again, I can't say it enough. This is phenomenal. This is why you do what you do, and we appreciate it, and this is why we're here. I don't mean to cut off conversation, but I know we have some other areas to get to. But Mr. Chair, others, are there any?
Can I just make one comment? Though?
Please.
before we're going to have a plan we want to implement. But I also think we've got to look at what challenges are going to where we are now as a city that will stop us actually meeting some of these aspirational plans. Safety, maybe I've missed it through the 1,100 pages, but safety didn't come up that much. Which, for me is if we can get safety right for the community, that then we can look at complete communities. We can look at how we connect to each other. So what is going to hold us up from successfully implementing a 20-year plan, and what are the areas that we've got to really focus on now?
And Commissioner, to your point, there are lots of aspects of community life that are not directly represented in this plan, because this plan, it is a focus on land use and physical development. Now, doesn't mean that it's absent. So it's looking at things like SEPTED, making sure that we're building things in a way that does not create any levels of diminishing safety or limits access to something. But this is not, I will say, that plan. Certainly this plan is vetted and viewed by people that are responsible for public safety, and certainly education may be another area. So why does this? Because that's not the focus of this plan. We want this to be foundational to then be able to influence and shape those more direct plans that deal with those issues. And so at the beginning, a lot of this was about what this plan is about and what it's not. And I think that would be one area in terms, but we'd want to know that we are physically shaping, reshaping, creating things with the greatest degree of safety possible. And that comes through a variety of different ways, levels of activity, a whole host of other things. But, and I think staff will attest, and Gerald and Morgan, and you mentioned Commissioner Enders, what about this element? And I sometimes was, the person working group saying, I think this may not be relevant for our particular plan, because what's that physical basis and connection? That's a bottom line here for us. But again, we know that there's others, we've got great feedback from the health department as it relates to the community health plan. And you would think, why does this document influence what they do? But it really clearly does, because physical arrangement, orientation, degree of maintenance all plays into health, safety, opportunities for education, all host of things.
Yeah, I like the conversation. I like the topics that are brought up. I want to check, Commissioner Beasley, have anything to add?
Yes, I've had my mouth open a couple times to say something.
That's what I wanted to
waited.
hear.
Apologies, we can't see raised hands, so my apologies here.
No, I didn't raise a hand. I'm just listening. I've got so many things to touch on, but I think I will touch on maybe the biggest one for me. Comment was made on infrastructure, and it just flowed out Northland, Southland because of the infrastructure that was there. And I remember in one of the tiles I was reading through, it did mention how to increase those areas that aren't invested in as much. And it mentioned the Blue Valley area. But we also have two other areas that are on the east side that I don't see a reference to. And I don't know what their official names are, but the one industrial type area is there off of Van Brunt or Emmanuel Cleaver, and the other one is off of 63rd, just east of the water department. Those pockets need new investment. They used to be up and running, but they're not doing that now. So how do we help direct in our narrative to those areas that we know have not had that type of investment that would go back to the business attraction and retention and jobs? The other thing is, I didn't write my note right, but it had mentioned concentration in transit areas, but it said East Bottoms, and I'm wondering if you really meant West Bottoms.
I don't know that specific reference right offhand, but we can check that to see if there was a mistake. But really, we tried. We probably shouldn't be mentioning specific districts like that too much in this plan, because Because it is a higher level document, and that really is the role of the area plans, is to think about identifying those specific areas that need new investment. And what this plan is recommending is that for areas like that, we do, through the area planning process, we identify them. You could identify them outside of an area planning process, I suppose, as well, and then do a development plan for how to revitalize and ensure future economic success of those areas as well. So that's what we're generally saying about identifying and then improving those areas so that they're successful in the future.
Commissioner Beasley.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Commissioner.
What I was going to now go to was the examples I felt you could refer to when people talk about the focus plan and the successes that grew out of that. If you have discussions of the current topics that are being discussed or projects, one would be changing and in providing green space over the 670 portion of the inner city downtown loop. And I think the other would be the development that has taken place along Berkeley Park and the river. Those, I think, were true things that you can show as successes from the focus plans to now. And then the current conversation taking place with the actual Royal Stadium. Those, I think, are concrete things that you can point back to us thinking in the past of what could work, what would be something good to have. And looking at how time has progressed, that they are coming to, and I hate this word, fruition, but anyhow, it's here, and it's things that we're being successful. Oh, and the streetcar, the transportation portion. So those things, I think, in discussion, not necessarily written, would help people understand what this new plan could help us achieve down the road.
Yes, agree. Thank you. And Commissioner, if you had that one particular comment where you felt that there was potentially an inaccuracy, if you wouldn't mind either dropping in the chat here or just sending us a note which comment is, we'll go back and take a look.
I will.
Perfect.
I'm done, Kobe.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to move on next section then.
Sorry, can I, just because,
Oh, we're moving on.
can I wrap a few thoughts? Since, I feel like this is important. Our names go on this. This is what we carve out time for. So of the 21 things where there are nearly 100 big ideas, I think big ideas get stronger when there are fewer and there's more focus. There are 3 of these objectives I would strike, meaning that over half of it, I think, is not relevant to city planning, and the city planning department can't control it. And I think things could be consolidated if there's something that's of value. Those 3 are access to jobs, business attraction and retention, and smart city. I'll send separate notes to you 3 later about why I feel that way about those 3. I'll take just a moment to note that on business attraction and retention, this is the only one, again, there are 14 that I just love. These are great. There are 4 that I'd like to consolidate, and I'll send notes on those as to why I think they could be consolidated. The 3 that I want to cut, as I mentioned, and the one that really almost I viewed as extremely frustrating was business retention and attraction. I think that there are a lot of things listed here that sound good, but I spent about a year talking to over 100 different stakeholders, from developers to engineers to city planners in this city and other cities, about frustrations in Kansas City. And as a small business owner, I would rather open a cafe in any part of Kansas City besides Kansas City, Missouri. I'd rather be in Lenexa, Lee Summit, et cetera, because of the process of opening a business. And so reading through business attraction and retention, it didn't feel that it spoke to the concerns that I have personally, or that I found when I talked to these 100 stakeholders in this year-long process that I embarked upon. So that's the one that I really think needs some heavy work, and I'll send separate notes, but those are the 3 that I think if we struck, these other amazing, amazing concepts will be stronger. Sorry. And thank you, Kobe, for the time.
I didn't get your third one. It was access to jobs, business.
And smart city. And the main reason on smart city is because if you read it, this is a terrible, terrible analysis or analogy, and I apologize to whoever wrote it. We had an intern one year who wrote us something about, it was a presentation on how cryptocurrency works. And he had all the right words in there, but it didn't make any sense and it wasn't actionable. And to me, the smart city thing has all the right things in there. It's like, we need to pay attention to smart cities, and it had all the right words in there. But to me, if I really tried to boil down each goal or community supported action, it was slim enough that we could integrate that into other components of this plan and not lose anything, but could make it more integrated with other components.
Well, and so if I can, so to be clear, because that's a very different statement than striking it, hearing that for that particular one, smart cities, it's like, hey, I think you can express those same things maybe closer to where they relate or in a more efficient way.
Yeah,
Absolutely got, whereas the other two, and those you're like, because of my hand motion,
in
those
both,
might be things that are struck, but
in both access to jobs, and I mean, I went through every, single one and wrote what I thought was useful. There's certainly good ideas in every single one of these. My metric was, if over half of it could be moved, if half of it that I think should be, if it's less than half that I think should be retained, let's move it somewhere else or just really boil it down. So an example would be use base zoning districts or overlays to permit more multifamily housing and employment areas. That's great. No, I mean, that's good, but there wasn't enough in access to jobs for me to make it a whole call out.
So could I expand your comment then to say that out of all three of them, it is certainly your feedback, other commissioners' feedback, that, and I think you set some very clear criteria, which I appreciate. If more than half of it you felt could go someplace else and it wasn't holding together on its own, that's probably the course we should pursue. Different than, hey, no relevance, a strike. So we'll appreciate we'll appreciate those detailed comments.
Yeah,
and
incorrect language.
Please know it's not unlike conversations that anybody crafts the document. I mean, this has been we started at 25 objectives. At one
Oh,
point.
no.
50. So this is not like,
I believe it.
This is the process.
I
And
totally
this is why
believe.
we do it.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the clarity, and that's why I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper.
Awesome.
Because it's a lot of,
Mhm.
pressure. And to your point, if something's going to be kind of pulled out to that level, it needs to be strong, it needs to be actionable. And all of you as commissioners looking at the lens of all of this, this is not an exercise to create pretty language. It's an exercise, have something, your point, that feels achievable and actionable. And sometimes reorganizing something makes it actionable, but sometimes if there's something from your perspective, like, I don't ever see that happening, that's the feedback that we would need to have. But I'd appreciate the way in which you've done it is, let me at least take a look to see whether if I move it someplace else, it's really going to strengthen and get the message. Or you could put it anywhere you want. That phrase or that action is not going to either be implementable or achieve something that, from your perspective, we feel the city needs to achieve.
Well, I think for me, I'm asking myself about, is there a regulatory piece in there for us? Because particularly when I think about access to jobs, I don't want to move into a city where employment or business growth or access to jobs is not, a core value of that city. But I think if we just have it on paper and we're not looking, and when I think about a regulatory piece, this is probably not going to make sense, but Tyler, I'm thinking about blight. Right? When people come in here and they have these blight studies and they show these pictures, and then if you get the blight designation, then other things happen after that for that particular project. So for me, if we got all these data centers and we're talking about workforce housing, is there a regulatory companion like blight study, right? That it signifies when you're in this district and you have met these qualifiers, then other things happen in development to make it easier. If not, then I think to your point, it's like, hey, there's a lot of pretty words, but we haven't thought about what the regulatory piece, if any, can be. The same way with business retention and attraction. I think that, I have a limited understanding. I don't know what your experience was like with KC BizCare, but I think that there are not, well, at least what I've heard is that there are not that many cities in the country that have that specialized kind of office. But if it isn't given proper funding, if it doesn't have, an ability to really help maneuver the red tape, then, is it here? So I don't know. I haven't done that.
Personally, on
level.
that note, I hear, and it's not surprising that most people wouldn't hear it, but with the 200+ businesses we work with, I hear more frustration with BizCare than success stories. And I know the success stories exist, and those are the ones that get championed for good reason. And I do think BizCare has tremendous value in tremendous areas, but it is not as comprehensive as people feel it is.
So does that become a piece, like if it's not even in here, do we even have the opportunity to make it more comprehensive? I don't know,
You know, I also just, I don't want to strike certainly access to jobs, because I actually think we need to think about how we create jobs in a new economy, which is again, I'll give an example of Prince George's County, which I've worked with. They had a stormwater program. They made that a job creation program for minorities and so forth, looking at social equity, not only on public, but on private land. The last figure I saw, and I think they'll probably be upgrading that, but last figure I saw was there was $200 million worth of investment into green infrastructure, stormwater management. They had an economic development impact of $650 million with that investment, with job growth and so forth. The reason why they used that was everybody was leaving Prince George's County to go to Virginia. They wanted to retain jobs and so forth. That's what I'm talking about, a circular economy. And I think we can do that here because we've got a consent decree that we've got to meet. Can we leverage what we're doing there or in a greater manner to help create that circular economy where we actually develop companies that can then go out and do things from a more national perspective as well. But we've got that opportunity. If we delay much longer, we're going to lose it. But that to me is creating the new economy jobs as well.
So, Mr. Chair, and it'll be a culminating point, I hope, but through the conversation, I was hearing all of you talk about just some of those community support actions, some of the considerations. I mean, a baseline was, is it something that is actionable? You mentioned where, would something be better, stronger, depending on where we located in the plan? People have mentioned about, is there a dot or an asterisk where something would down the line potentially have some type of regulatory potential, I called it. But is there any relationship to how this is looked at with whatever the process is to approve whatever is being recommended or thought about? And then finally, wrapping up, I think it's the idea of understanding who is actually building something or making the improvement, and how do we leverage the economics around that to retain dollars as close to the project site as possible, I will call it, within community. Those were some of the overall, if I was kind of summing up the thoughts and the lenses that it sounds like each of you have used to take a look at those CSAs. So if you could go, take another look at using some of those different points. I think if there's consensus that now, again, one person says it should stay, that's different. But I think that's a really healthy list. It's certainly a list that will be helpful for us as we go back and take a look at this, at the CSAs.
I just wanted to make a distinction in terms of how I'm envisioning this. I do tend to have a comfort level with having a lot of pieces because we are talking 20 years. And I've actually personally been in a process of doing strategic planning for my organization. So I'm in this mindset. I find that where you're able to prioritize and make it clear how you're going to go about certain tasks really comes in the implementation plan and what happens first. And some of those other things that are at the back end, they may happen, they may never happen. They might get moved to the front, 3 years later when there's a grant opportunity to do so. So I would say, I just want to speak as a sort of global statement. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with having more pieces because I think the implementation is where you really need to hone in on what you're going to do.
I think if we dove into this, and I know we don't have the time, but I think you all would see what I'm saying, like prepare residents for future careers. That's not the job of the city planning department. And I don't think that should be in our plan. And there are lots of things like that that I think are just like, are they within our control as a city to do, or is that just market, determined? And so those are the types of things where, like, of course, I love the idea of access to jobs. And so something that I like, encourage compact development for medical, educational, and institutional campuses. That's great. You could live anywhere. I don't know if that's directly access to jobs. Like, yeah, compact development does help. And so I think that they're the good parts that can be taken out, but we have to understand, do we want our planning department to focus on expediting permits and expediting inspections? Or do we want them to focus on job attraction? And that's just not what I think the planning department should be doing. I think that's what KCADC does and other groups.
Well, as our department is structured now, we need to be doing both. To be clear about that, it's not a one or the other. My job is to make sure that we do all of it equally well. And there's just different forums about where we discuss that. So, and I'm saying that there's certain levels in depth that, yes, that are more related to it, but please don't, I would encourage you all not to limit or look at this plan and the aspirational elements and focus in on just one core area of the multiple responsibilities that we have. It's not an either or. And certainly I would appreciate whatever support there is for giving us all the resources to do all of it, because we're charged with all
I
of
think
it.
there are like 4 forces that have to be combined. They're like new organizations that have to be combined or created based upon this document.
And those are certainly conversations we're more than willing to have had in the past, will continue to have, love the outside stakeholder engagement focus in, but I wouldn't want the objectives of this plan to be limited by the thought as a department that does multiple things, that we can only really do one of them well. I will.
Mr. Williams, I think you brought up something that we may not be completely aware of, and that's all the tasks that are assigned to the planning department. I think our central focus has been on land use and development plans, but what else do you have under your umbrella to consider?
Sure.
You might give us some type of cheat sheet, so to speak, of the things that you do that nobody really knows you do.
Absolutely, Commissioner Beasley. The quick commercial. We are a department with 7 different divisions that focuses in terms of the permitting aspects. Yes, we have a permits group. We have an inspections group. We have a plan review group. We have those elements, and we have a land development division group where we approve publicly built private infrastructure. The portion of our department that this group may be more familiar with, although I think you really touched upon all of them, obviously it's the development management team that manages all of you in the cases that you see. It's the long range planning and preservation group that is here. And then there's our admin group that picks up things that people might not think we do. Community Improvement District management, lien waiver, host of other things. I would encourage everybody, this is a plug for our website, kcmo.gov/planning, because we are a department that has up our entire org chart, our A to Z of everything we cover. So, and again, not looking to short circuit the conversation of how could we do things in a way that's enhanced, that is, helping to expedite all host of things. But please try not to use that as a limitation of this document, because Kansas City will be Kansas City. Down the line, somebody can decide, and I'm making this up for everybody who's listening, that maybe some portions of the things that are more process or permit goes in one group and it goes another. We are actually the result of 2 separate departments back in the early 2000s that were separate, that were morphed together. So the form and government of structure changes. The objectives and the benefits about sustainable quality development, regardless of who does it, those remain.
All right, everybody ready to move on?
Thank you so much. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just a note, it is 11 o'clock and I hope we will be done before 1 o'clock. So we don't need to take the 1 hour lunch or the half-hour lunch in there. So,
Depends on what
Just-
lunch
just-
is. No, I'm just-
yeah. Does anybody need a break at this time? Because we've been going for a little over 2 hours. Should we take a 15-minute break? I'm not sure how much time we have to to finish, maybe an hour?
We're here for as long as you are. And I guess we would dust off luncheon menus, but no, I think our goal really would be to try to have things concluded before you'd have to take a lunch break.
Let's take a 15-minute lunch break or break, not a lunch break, but just a 15-minute break real quick and then come back. That allows us to do what we need to do for a little bit and then come back and finish up. Does that work?
Great. That's perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
so it's 11 o'clock on my computer now. We'll be back at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, would you?
Yeah, I think zoning's a much more specific development codified. Whereas the comprehensive planning is it's much more thinking guidance more than a codified tool that like.
But planning drives zoning. So a plan like this will set up future regulatory
So you ready? Orstein, you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and reconvene our meeting. And,
Mr. Chair, we have 3 more modules left with the goal of concluding our presentation before noon time, so about 45 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
We need to get into our implementation, how the plan is used, particularly by you all. So again, this is a suite of tools that the plan will have for you all and for us and for developers even to use as we're considering or designing projects in the city. So really 3 different things. Our 10 goal statements, we have converted into what we're calling goal supporting criteria. It's a set of statements based on the goals, the 10 goals that help you determine if a project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, generally speaking. Sort of a checklist almost, if you will. The global design guidelines, which we went over with you all when we were here in September to give you an update on the comprehensive plan. Those are considerations for when you're designing something as a development or a public improvement, a street or a bridge or a new building, any of those kinds of things. Those global design guidelines are those things we would want to see in a new development or public improvement anywhere in the city, regardless of context. And they're paired up with the development form and context guidelines, which are more specific guidance depending on where you are in the city. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But those are the tools that we're providing within the plan to help evaluate projects as they come forward. And then, of course, all of the CSAs, the community support actions that you see within the objectives, also work in tandem with those 3 tools to create quality development throughout the city. So again, this is our goal supporting criteria, which is really essentially just a restatement of the 10 goals. We'll have some examples of how you might achieve each of these 10 goals through your proposal. And it might be just an ordinance or a new initiative in the city, not necessarily something you're designing physically, but in a way to evaluate if a proposal is consistent or not, generally speaking, with the comprehensive plan, using the 10 broad goals as guidance. Then we have our global design guidelines, which are, again, those guidelines we would want incorporated into anything you're designing, from a private development to a public improvement, a set of statements that help you to help guide you through that design process and ensure that you're designing something in a way that's consistent with the comprehensive plan. And again, these global design guidelines are things we want to see everywhere in all areas of the city, regardless of context. Any time you're designing something in the city. Next slide. I won't go through these in any great detail. We did go through these in September. Let me know if you want to go back and look at anything and open that. The context and form typologies. This is the concept we have in our newer area plans, where we have development form guidelines and we have these 4 area types: corridors, nodes, districts, and neighborhoods. What we're suggesting is that we add a layer to that that we're calling context. So those 4 basic kinds of context we're suggesting are downtown, urban, suburban, and rural. And then you determine which of these 4 area types you're in and which of those 4 contexts you're in. And then they would have a unique set of guidelines for you to use, for staff to use, for a developer to use as they're developing something. To guide appropriate quality development depending on the context you're developing within. And this is an example of how you might do that. Your 4 different form typologies paired up with your 4 different context typologies. If you check the box where you're in a suburban district, there would be a set of guidelines specifically for that, for a district that's located in a suburban context versus a downtown or a rural context. And again, this would be used by staff as well as private developers, or even, I suppose, someone who's developing a public improvement in a certain area of the city as well. And then it goes with the global development considerations that these 2 work in tandem. So again, this is our suite of tools to be used to evaluate projects and help people design projects in a consistent way with the comprehensive plan, the goals, supporting criteria based on the 10 goals, our global design guidelines, and our more specific development form context guidelines. And then, of course, our CSAs and other citywide planning documents. We'll have a database of all those recommendations linked together to help provide site-specific guidance that leads to quality development throughout Kansas City. So any questions about any of that?
Couple questions. The global design guidelines. Can you tell me a little bit of how those get implemented? Are those questions that are posed to a applicant and they respond in a statement, or how does that play out?
Hopefully this is a list of questions that an applicant is using as they're developing their design before they come to us, right? But it would also be a checklist, if you will, that staff would use as we're evaluating things, preparing a staff report for this body or other bodies to evaluate a project as to whether it's complying with the comprehensive global considerations.
So do you imagine for each staff report, we would see those listed and then like a yes or no or a checkbox next to them based on staff
Something
review?
like that. Yeah. I
Okay.
don't know if it's a yes or a no or a checkbox, or maybe Jeff has some.
Yeah,
thoughts.
I'm almost thinking it may not wind up being a clear yes or a no on certain things and a threshold. And I think these are all their guidelines, their considerations. I think that's something we would work to understand.
Yeah.
Again, I think a lot of it is in the wording and understand these are things that we feel we can apply universally. But that doesn't mean because they can be applied universally that all of those particular items need to be met for something to be valid. So I think it is, I think us looking at staff reports that are structured in this way that identify them as guidelines. So it might be the text you're used to now, but just with these things as headings or organizational elements, I think it could be enough to reinforce the plan. I think if it starts going to where it would be something more like active checks, you need to meet this criteria. That's a very different conversation that would need to take place, and it would need to evolve with lots of consensus from a whole series of stakeholders.
I guess I agree on the term guidelines and that they are not something that are, kind of a black and white, you must do this. I do think from our review, just expediency, it is kind of helpful to have a check the box situation, even if that means that if a box isn't checked, it does not impact whether they're going to receive it. But if there's, how many global design guidelines are there? How many global design guidelines are there?
These two slides worth.
About 16?
15.
About 16.
16.
So like if somebody had only 4 of the 16 boxes checked, I wouldn't necessarily need to know what for. I just would have a sense of, this project is not the project I want to negotiate heavily on, so just.
Or again, it's a header. If it's a section of a staff report that says global design considerations, and you see the 4 that you see listed are the ones that people are meeting, or they're ones that people aren't meeting.
Yeah.
It's just the consistent asking of the question and formed in a consistent way for decision makers of all types to be able to evaluate the material as they so see fit. There's nothing to this list that indicates it's in any priority order. Because somebody achieves 4 of the 12, there could be 3 or 4 of them on there that achieving them could potentially have even greater benefit than achieving all the others. It's a subjective process. I think it's just making sure we consistently ask the question and format responses in ways that are accessible to many people, as many people as possible.
And I think this does to Commissioner Hill's point around continuity between what we do and the council does. Like these are points that and I even think it would be helpful to have a meeting with council and ourselves once the plan is approved. And this would be the place where I would emphasize is we both agree on these guidelines, and hopefully we can find more continuity in our recommendations to their decisions.
I think so too. I mean, especially I can think of a number of or a few cases where we've had activities there
Can your microphone, please?
Oh, we don't think the conductivity's there. But yeah, it's been passed by council. So I agree with you there. And then social and economic barriers are, I think, important today and tomorrow. But yeah, I agree. We should have something like a checklist or on the staff report.
I did have another question, your context piece where you divided it based on downtown, urban, suburban, and rural. I think the only tricky thing that I see is, how you define urban versus suburban, maybe even rural as well in downtown. I think when I hear the word suburban, I think of something usually unpleasant, which is like a lot of pavement, a lot of car-centric movement.
I disagree.
Well, yeah, no, but I'm saying you probably have a different connotation. So that's why I say, I think that the suburban context could actually operate in a very urban way, be very walkable, be very connected, community oriented. But I wouldn't want there to be sort of an ingrained belief of what suburban is. Okay, Kobe, I want you to follow up because I don't even want to say something.
It's with the purpose of beginning to identify what are the typical features you might find in those contexts, but it does not mean that those are necessarily the features, that all those existing features are things that are be retained. There is still aspirational elements, other pieces to it. And I think the broader global considerations and the overall 10 goals of the plan, there would be comments there that talk about how those environments change to get there. I think it's just the difference. Kansas City is an amazing, wonderful place because we have all of these contexts. And I will tell you again, talk about winnowing down. I think we started with a list, and I know Joe was there as well. Did we start with a list of like 7, 8? And we were kind of just like chopping and doing pieces and what's a context?
Yeah, we debated that very question for a very long time.
So
That really frustrated.
it is hard. And one of the things you would not see is a very clear map that says this is urban and this is suburban, because it's fluid, it moves, it shifts and changes. Something could be one context, and after development pattern of a few years, it's something very different. So, but it was important that we try to lean into the understanding corridor node district neighborhood is in our area plan systems. It seemingly is working well in good guidance, but not every corridor node district and neighborhood is configured the same way. It is shaped upon its environment, then the need to do this. And I think part of this conversation, even having this system, somebody could come back and say, I call it suburban, but I really think it's urban. That could be a part of it, but we need to begin to some general definitions. And I think it is about, no matter what you call it, you're going to find recommendations that talk about supporting the overall recommendations of the plan.
So walkability in all of those is a
Right. It's not like, hey, it's this context, go walk, or it's urban and we don't want to talk about open space. It's
got it.
Yeah.
That's how
My
it
suburban
works.
neighborhood is very walkable. We have sidewalks all the way through every street. I mean, but it's not large lots that are 2 to 3 acres. They're a normal size subdivision lot that you can still walk and do whatever you want to do in our neighborhood.
I just wanted to point out my favorite story from my area planning experiences in Little Blue Valley area, which is somewhat rural, somewhat suburban. They really hit us hard with rural character is our character, and they wanted to establish that as a norm in all development that came in. But they also really embraced the idea of compact, walkable, mixed-use development. Maybe not for the same reasons other people do in other parts of the city, but they liked it because it was compact. Didn't encroach on those natural systems and left open spaces and things like that. And frankly, everyone I think likes the walkable format. So, that's a rural example that was embracing a more urban idea, within their area. So this is all going to be addressed through our area planning processes and community conversation about what context is right for. It's all very contextual.
Which that vision to me is, I don't live in the Northland, so I won't take ownership of it, but that seems like the vision I would love to see in the Northland is like act where you can make it walkable, where you can get preservation of rural areas and preservation, et cetera.
We're a special place that we have this many different ways to live, places to live, types of communities to live in. And we want to make sure that we respect that and continue and enhance all of those places the way those places want to be addressed.
I agree.
Public forum.
I'm just, Mr. Chair, would you mind if I ask Commissioner Beasley, because I don't want to,
Absolutely. I go ahead if you'd like to.
oh, no, you, please.
Commissioner Beasley,
I
any
was sitting-
comments before we move on to
I was
the?
sitting here laughing because I was thinking, even in the urban setting, we have pockets that can be considered rural because they don't have sidewalks and curbs and things of that nature. So that we can move on. I was just laughing.
And again, my apologies, because we're doing screen share, I can't see Commissioner Beasley like I can see the other commissioners. So that's why I deferred in that way, but we'll roll on to implementation.
There's a lot of screens, but we can't see that. All right, so I will walk us through some introductory information about how implementation is going to work for the comprehensive plan. Obviously, this body, council, all of the other committees in the city will have a very important role in implementing the comprehensive plan. We hope that you'll be able to use the plan overall and some of these development review tools that we just talked about in your own evaluations of the projects that come before you, and helping us to make sure that all of these recommendations, all of our goals are really being fully integrated into everything that we review for the city. Implementation is going to have a couple of different components to it. First of all, is that implementation matrix that we mentioned before. This is going to be a table that is going to lay out every recommendation that is in the plan. So taking all the CSAs from the objectives and putting them together into one matrix. And that matrix is going to identify the stakeholders who are most responsible for implementing that recommendation, estimated amount of cost. So if this is something that's going to be a low cost thing that we can accomplish pretty quickly, is this something that is going to have a high cost associated to it and will be much more complicated? It's also going to have general timelines. It's something that we can do, right away. Or is this something that's going to take several years of planning, studies that go into implementing a full project? The measures of success are you can refer to these as different things: key performance indicators, metrics, measures of success. It's all the same thing. It's the hard data that we can use to track success over time in how we implement the plan. We have identified numerous metrics that we are currently tracking at the city, primarily through Data KC, and then through some other plans that the city is working through. Other departments track different things. So we've been communicating with those groups and seeing what it is we are tracking right now. What of those metrics are going to bolster tracking the success of the comprehensive plan specifically? And then what are some of the things that we should be thinking about tracking into the future? Maybe we don't have the technology available right now. Maybe it's something that we could purchase. Maybe it's something we just need to keep an eye out for into the future. So what are the things that we should be thinking about tracking into the future? And then using that matrix and those measures of success to do a periodic review. We haven't landed on a specific timeline or anything just yet, so we're open to feedback on that. But how can we periodically come back, review the comprehensive plan, review the matrix, see what we've accomplished, and see where we're maybe falling short? Just
on that.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just comes to mind. So implementation, we pass, city passes it, the plan, but the policies may not match the plan straight away. There could be changes in policy that need to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So how, as a commission, because we're looking at, does it meet policy, land use,
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be caught. How quickly are we going to be changing those policies to reflect the comprehensive plan that's just been passed?
Well, I think it really would be based upon the degree of policy change. I think this will always be a plan where there'll always be an environment where policy will be changing along the way. I think that's one of the things that will come right after or at the first review cycle for the plan? Are there things that are recommendations here or get implemented that can happen without there to be the need for any policy change? I think recognizing that, and that's something that would put it on a shorter track for implementation versus something that has a much bigger policy conversation. Those are the considerations that help set the timeframes. I think along the way, again, through a conversation today, what I'm hearing is that periodic review also tracking potentially things that were recommended as guidelines that there would be a recommendation at this body to move to mandates or to move more to official to policy. So I would expect the comments coming in this group talk about policy, like you talk about other policy considerations that come to your board right now. You do that. I think this is probably more of a proactive way for this body to potentially get some of those policy considerations potentially moved up a priority list. So I see it happening simultaneously. I don't see it's the case where necessarily it's a recommendation is made here and then we have to have the policy change and then things get implemented. Things may be implemented along the way. There's lots of things that happen in the life of a city where the private sector decides this is something we should be doing and it's a good practice. And then we as government kind of catch up and say, oh yeah, since everybody is doing that, maybe we should have a policy to encourage more of it or to put some guidelines around it. So it's going to be a good bit of back and forth.
Yeah, or vice versa, where the policies
Driving.
the development community goes, hey, we're meeting policy, and we go, well, it's not meeting our comprehensive plan.
And I think that's the evaluation part. That potentially is, I'll call it the unintended consequences part. Everybody with the best of intentions put a policy initiative forward or something else, and you're evaluating it. So it's kind of a look back, if you will. But I think it's the guidance from this group and other about how do we structure the timeline, as Morgan mentioned, the forms in which those happen. What are those set questions we're going to ask of ourselves as we would shift the plan?
So this is just an example of what that implementation matrix may look like. It's one that's taken from one of our more recently updated area plans. As you can see, it's got those identifiers that I discussed earlier. And, we're always open to, other suggestions on other information that we should be including in a tool like this that might make it more useful to not only you all, but the development community and the public in general. We want to make sure it's not just, plannerese that only we understand and know how to interpret. We want to make sure this is something that everybody can use. And just to give you an idea of the metrics, the measures of success that we are looking at including in this, we've broken them out by the objective that they're most related to. We're trying to make sure that every objective has at least a few metrics that are assigned to it, but we want to make sure that they're not just there just to be there, that they are actually applicable and they are really speaking to how we accomplish those recommendations and how we can track those. So just for example, for city attractions, annual visitors to Kansas City and hotel and potentially, short-term rental tax revenue, those are some metrics that we can use to track to see if we're accomplishing the goals of creating not just a, regional destination, but making sure Kansas City is a draw nationally as well too. Some other metrics that I'll just touch on, new housing permits for development patterns, construction value, infrastructure life cycle costs, displacement mitigation, tracking evictions, and how many affordable units are being developed or things that we can look at for that. Of course, environmental health and resiliency. We've got a lot of environmental metrics included in the climate plan that we're also going to include here. Historic preservation, taking a look at the items that are being added to the register versus sites that maybe have been demolished or being looking at to be demolished that meet the criteria to be designated as historical preservation site, but maybe have not been added to the register yet. So looking at those differences and those policies, mobility, new sidewalks, number of repaired sidewalks, vehicle light households, so households that only have one vehicle versus having two. Movement of goods, travel truck time, parking, curb management, surface parking areas, and, the surface area compared over time, seeing if we reduce that number, if that number increases. Life expectancy for public health, of course, is an important one. And then lastly, smart city and technology, making sure everyone has broadband access, making sure that those numbers are increasing over time. And I should mention, all of these will have a specific identifiers, whether it's something that needs to increase, something that needs to decrease, and also our consultants with WSP, and also working through My Sidewalk and a lot of the data that comes from that platform, identifying, which of these metrics are very strong, they're very clear, they're very easily to calculate, which ones may need a little bit more tweaking to make sure it's something that we is a solid metric that we can use. So there's some, up in there. Yeah.
So just because I had identified smart city technology and trends as something that I thought was difficult to justify relative to the other 20, what is our ability to provide broadband access? Like, what do you feel your limits are of what you all can do to increase accessibility?
Well, the broadband access conversation was really an interesting one, I think, especially as we look at the pandemic experience. I think before there were very broad statements about broadband and people having access to it. And I think a lot of those conversations were more looking at that as a nicety than as a minimum requirement for people to be able to do the things they need to do in their life. And obviously, when pandemic had us all go home, it was understanding that broadband access was key for schooling and work and other kinds of things. Some of the work through, and this is where the collaboration and work with regional partners through KC Rising, broadband access became an issue. And I'm going to channel Commissioner Alder, became an opportunity because of federal funding coming down for broadband. Everybody decided we should really have a good definition of what does good broadband access mean. It doesn't mean you can get some level of internet, but you need it at a certain level. So there's the kind of a regional setting about what that is. That at least helps understand what the criteria is. And then we're talking about and saying I think it's important for this plan to say the importance of it, and that access needs to be everywhere. And then it begins to set the benchmark in measuring how much of the city has, what percentage of residents in the city or locations have access to quality, high-speed broadband access. And it's, again, not just so that people get more television channels. Boy, I'm really dating myself with that statement. But anyway, it's really about having the appropriate, it's like electricity. If you only had 50% of the power you needed to run your home, you're not running your home. It's kind of the same thing. So that's how this plan can begin to influence some of these things, to have people ask questions. I can say that I know that some of the other development considerations and other projects in the past, people have asked, well, and it depends, I think, depending on the form, have we made sure that even every unit that we put in a building has the appropriate wiring and access points, are the kinds of things. I know you can do things wirelessly. I'm not that out of it, but I think it's important. That's where a plan like this said, look, everybody in the city needs access to high quality broadband access. This is the current metric. Only this percentage of residents have it. To your point, this is the metric. We need to grow that. How are we doing in growing that? We have a very clear, if a federal funding opportunity, well, Kansas City doesn't goal. No, we do have a goal. This is where we are. This is what we need to do. And if you give us money, this is how we'll make it better, because we're strategically thinking about it. That's how a lot of those smart technologies work. Again, to your point, though, it's a challenge. What seems like a really smart technology now will be eclipsed, but is it something universal? And I'll stop there.
So for the sake of example, let's say 80% of Kansas Cityans have what we would determine as good broadband access. Of the 20% that do not, sounds like one option would be there's federal money that gets passed down. But in your estimation, like of that 20%, if it gets solved or addressed in the next 5-10 years, what percent of that is like AT&T and Time Warner deciding to go add? And what percent of it is Kansas City as a city saying, we're going to, determine that we're going to put funds towards this?
It is definitely a public-private partnership. To my knowledge, we're not coming up with network. We do this, but I think it's leveraging opportunities. When Google came to say, hey, you want a friend, these are things you can do. When opportunities present itself, you have some community-wide goal already established. So anybody making improvements anywhere to say, hey, look, is there an opportunity to increase your broadband access because of what you are already doing? That's the benefit of goals like this as it relates to infrastructure. That, hey, we stated what our bottom line is, where we're going. You're doing something in this space. What can we do to make it better? That's how we're trying to craft things like this, especially around technology, because it just changes. But again, are there things that we universally, I think we feel there's benefit to having audible traffic crossing devices and intersections. How many of those do we have? Should we deploy more? Every opportunity we have to deploy them. If we have a pot of money, are we being strategic about it? Hey, do we know where they're located? Do we need to build onto an existing network or concentrate? So
If there was an assessment, let's say 5 years in, on all these measures of success, and some of them were great, some of them were low, that would more be a report card for the city, not for the planning department. Is that fair?
yeah,
Okay.
this plan gets adopted through full council. This is a citywide plan. We are the preparers of the plan, but this is a citywide plan to be applied by all of us.
It could also help to identify areas where we need to be working closer with our other departments and making sure some of these metrics get met and the recommendations are accomplished.
So one of the pieces, and I think it goes to the earlier conversation around like the process and the how and how departments talk to one another or outside of City Hall, you know, the transit authorities, et cetera. One thing that I feel like is kind of missing, and it might be in that connected city component, is not just connected city in terms of like physical connectivity, but I could see a whole section in there just about connectivity amongst the agencies that serve infrastructure and housing, et cetera. That's one thing with like the climate planning I've done that I've found was helpful. It's not just about what you want to do, but like, how are you going to do it and how are you going to partner? And that there's actually measures of success on that so that you can report out and say, the council did meet with CPC, you know, we did meet with these organizations. We did have a summit and talk through how we were going to work through these things together. We did share monthly reports with each other, whatever that looks like, but just some way to measure that people are talking to each other as they go through these 21 different pieces.
Mhm.
SC11, that was like one of the absolute favorites. SC11 covers that pretty well.
Okay, where's that?
Again, it's a thing that I want to get rid of, but I do
see.
really like SC11.
Or even just a call out of, as you think about the multiple different like commissions and boards, BCA, which one of these metrics of success or strategies actually align to us? Because there will be some that will not, that, you know, to Tyler's point, I think it's that user guide or however, much later down the road, right? Is how do we look at this in terms of what this governing body is looking for?
I would say it's an open system. I mean, it's an open system and an open platform. There may be people who are focusing on one particular area or serving constituency. In this case, be okay, that might look to kind of self-select what they focus on. Vision Zero is kind of an interesting term, and it's one here. And as I went to the group to talk about it, you know, Vision Zero right now, it's pretty understood. It's a term of art for 2023. And I had to get my head around, should we be that specific? Some of these others don't go to that. But Vision Zero, I think we felt that it was at such a level, it's used, you know, internationally. It has some very clear metrics, and some of those metrics you're seeing there, those are very clear. That wasn't us rethinking them. Those are their very clear metrics. So when we start talking about Vision Zero, I expect them that they're probably going to stay within that list. It'd be great if what they did in supporting that list got us to quality development or better understanding of public transportation or how we physically shape public spaces. But we know they're going to stay in the Vision Zero lane, if you will, not totally, pun totally not intended. But I think we'll see people so people who focus in on technology, they'll use those. So I think it's okay. It is not that I've got 100 of them and you have to make a positive movement on 100 of them for what you're doing to be beneficial. No, we want to talk today about public transportation. And for public transportation, these are the metrics and measures or the objectives that apply. We want to know there's a relationship, but we don't set all of those relationships.
I was going to just on that, you know, internationally, you know, I haven't read our climate change. I probably should have. But, you know, the UN has set certain goals and so forth. How does our climate change policy look at that, or what areas are we meeting? Because that actually will attract investment into our community. If we can show that we're meeting those UN goals, or we've got aspirations to meet, you're going to get a lot of money that people would say, yeah, this is an attractive place to invest in.
I was thinking about something like super specific, but certainly ties into the fabric, maybe a decade ago, if not that long, there was this idea of like, we have to increase the number of, hotels because we want to attract these, big conferences to come. And I also think that many people, when they travel, also like Airbnb. But when we think about like, what's our responsibility with regulating Airbnb, and certainly when we see it here, and how does this create, housing diversity? Because some neighborhoods want it, some neighborhoods don't. But as we start thinking about, a future forward city, you're going to start having these non-traditional spaces that people are looking like, is your city open and available to it? Much in the same way we saw like cities pushing back on Uber, right? Like what else is next? So, I'm just trying to think about how we balance like the very specific things that come before us. That's about neighborhood and place, and maybe this unit with, but broader, people are wanting to see this type of availability.
And so you've wonderfully expressed the challenge and the opportunity with comprehensive plans and planning. It's happening at the moment and the now, and there's specific things to consider, but it also needs to happen in a way that's looking at things holistically, globally, and in many ways trying to at least set some common foundation of things that people have not even contemplated yet. That's the balancing act for us.
The other tool we forgot to mention, the time machine. We're working on that one too.
Or that like Ubers have to be electric, I don't know. But, as we think about our city.
It morphs, it rolls. We have a energy code change coming up for buildings in July, and some of that was talking about looking at mandating plugs for electric vehicles. Now, nowhere near on our radar, theoretically, for at least for residential use back in 1997.
Mhm.
So but if there's some core, what we can all say are core values of a sustainable community, and where land is a resource, and all those other kinds of things that are as much global and as much are pretty foundational understandings upon which we build and develop.
I do like the term future proof really sticks with me, because it is a little bit all encompassing, but it does tie into, do we need more gas stations in existing neighborhoods? It's kind of starting to become a question of whether that's even a use that we're going to have in the next decade or two. So I think there's words like that I think sort of flow down to, housing affordability. If our Airbnb situation is such that it is really squeezing our housing affordability, it's really compromising our values, then it may not be something we want in the city.
It may have been the pandemic and the effects from that, but a lot of our thinking around this was very much, we need to be prepared for what we don't know, and at least try to be as flexible enough that we can be proactive about how we react to it and how we plan for it.
And understanding those times we're coming back and we're checking in on this plan to seeing what we can all agree might need to shift and change. It's one of those challenges with long range planning and land use documents, the types of things, not necessarily changing every month, because of one small change, but it's having some type of a set schedule for looking at the plan holistically and looking at those items where I think everybody can agree, hey, congratulations, we've accomplished that. Or, wow, we thought that was going to go a different way. That's what, with your input and guidance, that's what we'd like to craft. So it's pretty much understood. It's some type of a literary or periodic review. I will, and included in these measures of success, is absolutely. Unless the committee had more.
Yeah, any last questions? Commissioner Beasley, any last comments or questions?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have some language comments, and I I think it could be efficient to just send those to you, add maybe.
Is there just something general you want to put on the record for all of
I
us,
do.
Commissioner Zadowski?
That's okay.
You
Yeah.
please.
I think all of them have a common theme, which is really trying to, though I do think people will drill into their silos of what objective they're responsible for. I'd love to see more overlapping language and climate readiness. And then to Commissioner Hill's point around education, kind of goes along with the public safety piece. It's hard to interweave into land use and things like that, but there's a few spots where I think we could try to use the power of this body and the power of the planning agencies to try to support our educational community. That's, to me, such a make or break on a city that it requires all hands on deck on that. So, and then the third was more of an economic justice lens to how we allocate resources and just putting that language in there in terms of provided for certain amenities. So I can provide those kind of instances. There's another part in here, just like access to jobs also should go hand in hand with access to childcare. Just things that I think could be better integrated into this.
Thank you. And we'll appreciate getting those comments in writing as well. Be helpful. Thank you.
All right. Well, we've saved the fun part for last for you. We are going to give you just a quick idea of what the final product is going to look like. So we are creating this on the Wix platform because of the different tools and ability that it gives us to be a little more creative about how we're putting this together. So having everything as simplified as possible, having big chunks of text condensed as much as possible, and making this as navigate.
And Maureen, as you move forward, should I have Sheila Vemmer come up and take a seat here if you're going to step us through, but if there's questions for her? She's here.
Yeah, we can have Sheila come on up if you guys have any questions about, the tool itself and how something like this can be used. So this is our first draft of our home landing page. Here you can see the page where you would link to all of the separate objectives. And to give you an idea of what an objective would look like, Sheila has created something that I think it's organized. I think it's streamlined. I think it's easy to see where you are in the document. And I think that the Wix platform gives us a lot of ability to personalize this as much as we can to the users. Just for the objective, we've got our overview, benefits, different sections.
I know we have a moment. Could you go to the top of the page and let's just talk about how things are organized in those pull down menus? And I don't know if are they there for public consumption? Great. Maybe
Actually,
Morgan,
can
maybe
you
just
refresh? Okay. I think I refreshed it.
So then you just kind of going over the menu at top, like home, and what people would expect under those different sections. Just one by one would be good.
Sure. So the main menu here, the background, that's going to be information about our public engagement process and the whole process that we've gone through to create the plan. The plan itself, we will have the vision and the goals laid out there so you can kind of understand the foundation of the plan itself. The topics are going to be 5 topic areas that you all very typically see as being the foundational elements of the plans that you review: transportation, housing, the very kind of most understood elements of planning. So we will have our topics listed there, and the topics will be connected to all of the different objectives and the goals and the specific recommendations that fall most cleanly under those different topics. So everything within this final product is going to be linked together to everything that it's related to. It's going to look like a very gigantic, complicated spider web on the back end, but we're trying to make sure that this is something that people can navigate quickly through, depending on what topic they're looking for or what specific objective that they want to focus on. The objectives, obviously, those are the 21 objectives where all of our recommendations live. And then our implementation section, that's going to have all of those implementation items that we discussed before, the matrix most specifically. Additional resources, we will make sure that we are linking to any related city plans or any agency plans that we work with. And also, linking back to the other things that the city planning and development department does, like our area plans, for example. And then tools, we're going to have some additional items there where people can use those in their own lives to try and implement some of the recommendations on their level. So that is our general skeleton, if you will, of the final product of what we're looking at here. And yeah, that is, and this is an example of where we're headed for the final product, of what you'll look like when you find an objective online and you're searching through it for a community action that you want to implement, or if you're just looking for some contextual information about how it relates to Kansas City specifically, or if you just want to see, if we're accomplishing these recommendations, what are the benefits that Kansas City is going to experience? So those are all the elements we're trying to incorporate into this very, detailed online document, if you will. And yeah, if you have any questions about, the things that Sheila's been working on and how she's putting this product together, she'd be more than happy to answer those for you too.
I did have a question going forward. Once the plan is adopted, is there like an advisory council or a group that's continuing from a community standpoint, continuing to kind of monitor the plan and its execution and that part of the engagement going forward after the plan is adopted?
I think after the adoption of the document, I think that's one of the considerations. How do we do that? With area plans, some of them have implementation committees, not. I think a lot of this. So I think that's conversation starting with elected leadership about how we would move forward with that structure.
Mr. Rojas, go ahead.
Yeah, this periodic review, who's going to do it and how often? One part of the city may be happy with the plan, another part of the city may not be.
So in terms of the cycle or the timeline, I think that's for a further conversation. This is a 20-year plan. I could see it be reasonable to look at things even on an annual basis potentially, or maybe there's certain things we'll look at over periods of time. To your point, I think that's where commissioners had asked these questions, like, well, what kind of body or entity that's going to be a part of that review? I think we know that anything that we would be proposing, we would be looking at the resources of our staff, resources of any other departments that are contributing data, just doing the work that they do. I think also as part of this request in future budget year, you'll also see that we've asked for resources to be able to do some of the additional mapping and keeping up with this document as well. So I think a lot will be determined, but I think that's essentially it. And I think there's a difference between kind of reporting about where something is and then talking about next, like what would we change? And I think that's a community conversation. The worst thing in the world would be have a plan that's based on community consensus support and talking to everybody. And then it's felt like somebody goes off in the back room and says, we're to change these 3 items. That's not the way in which it would work.
Anybody else? Any final thoughts here before we?
I think we just would want to give you some thoughts about next steps, Morgan. Is that the next piece? And then.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So the next steps that we are looking at, we've got a couple of items on our to-do list still to do. We have those 3 public meetings that we discussed, official announcements for those should be going out in the next day or 2. We're going to keep all of the objectives and the surveys attached to them open throughout the duration of those public meetings. We want to make sure that everyone has as many opportunities as possible to provide feedback. Then we are going to be on the back end completing the other sections of that objective that I just showed you on that web page, our context, and then filling out the other elements of the plan, such as the topics, the goals, and that implementation section we discussed as well. We're going to be creating that database of all of our community supported action items, creating that matrix, incorporating all of those measurements of success, or KPIs, key performance indicators is another term for that. We have some visualizations that we're going to be incorporating into those development review tools, so that it's not just, a list of text that tells you what kind of form and context guidelines you should be adhering to. But also it provides some kind of visualization so that people can understand, everyone has a similar idea of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about suburban, when we talk about corridors and things like that. So we're going to work on getting those incorporated into it as well. And then working with Sheila and her group on finishing building the website and going back and doing any text edits, any linkages between the different pages, making sure that all of that is functioning, and creating that final product where we hope to bring to all of you and to council in March for a final evaluation and hopefully adoption.
Sounds
So-
good. And it sounds like there's a lot yet to do to meet that point.
So that is, yeah, it does feel like a lot of things. My caution would be, I think that what you have going on between now and then may be the most important step of this plan. I think the implementation piece is the piece where you have to make some really hard decisions about what comes first and what comes second. And so I would just caution, we're not here to dictate the timeline, but giving enough space for that, because I think that's where when people look at the plan, they may buy into these different objectives, but I think the real power is going to be them buying into the implementation, particularly on the short term, because we all know the long term might shift, but the short term piece is just getting that right so people can buy in, see where they fit in the next 3 years, and then be able to continue to find it valuable.
I think that's a good point. Let's see if we can get some early wins to show, how the plan's been implemented too. I think that creates enthusiasm about the plan if we can show some early wins in the plan as well.
I'd like to see, because earlier I'd written down implementation part of the plan will have prioritization from our conversation. But as I look at this part of the pieces that are still yet to come, it doesn't include the implementation part. And so I don't know if based upon other plans that's had as much emphasis as you all are thinking it could have, which I think would be really exciting to see. And so in the context of implementation, I think that I would like to see call outs for the other groups or organizations that would have to be involved to make something successful. So that way it's clearly understood that you can have this bold aspirational idea, but you're also saying it would require these 3 other organizations to be on board for it, and it would require the appropriate funding. So that way, when someone reads it, they understand realistically what would be required, and we can both be aspirational and also have that information. Otherwise, my fear is that people would look at it and just think that it's a whole lot of great ideas that were created in a vacuum. So I think that not only timeline in terms of prioritization, if that can be factored in some way, not only cost, but then also what are the other organizations that have to play a role?
The cost is going to be one as well, that people are going to go, great plan. How much is it going to cost me from my pay packet every day or every week? Where's the money coming from? And I think there has to be some discussion around that and how funds through systems, different partnerships and so forth. So people just don't think they're just going to keep on getting taxed.
Yeah, there were a couple specific call outs where you all talked about potential ways of having dedicated funding. And although that might seem like, I think, a hurdle, I appreciated the option as like, hey, this is a potential funding source. And I would like to see as much of that as possible, or just saying this is going to be a cost absorbed by development, somehow just into explaining a potential source of revenue, not necessarily, or of funding.
And that feedback is really very helpful because unlike other plans, typically a comprehensive plan does not come with the idea, here's the city's comprehensive plan and it costs X billions of dollars, because that's where the figure is.
Sure.
But I do appreciate the feedback saying, hey, there's funding opportunities, leverage it, if there's expectations, who are your partners, what can you do? I just want to set that clearly, because for anybody listening, I don't want them to think it's a plan like others that come, here's your price tag and this is how we're going to do it. It's a 20-year document. That's not the expectation. But utilizing the language that you all have just shared, I think it's helpful to understand what can we get done now? Who do we need to partner with? And by the way, if this is a real priority of folks, everyone, then we're going to need to talk about dedicated funding streams somewhere.
And I think it would be appropriate if that's done throughout on certain instances, like, again, there's a section about equitable access to parks and parts of the city that don't have them, and how the city, that would be an expensive endeavor. I think then it's okay if there are call outs of potential funding sources to say cost is going to be a huge hurdle or a huge, difficulty in achieving this. I think that's okay to call it out, because then again, it allows you to have these really aspirational ideas.
I would say, just to be really specific in the short term, and maybe this isn't something in the language in the plan, but something that you do to determine what order in which you put things, is to just go through the federal grant opportunities through the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and any other opportunities that you see in that space, have conversations at the state level, have conversations with folks at MARC, and just, even if it's a very high level idea of where those opportunities are, just to be able to say, there are, like right now, there's a lot of broadband money. There's also a lot of money around transportation and green infrastructure and things like that. So just like being able to kind of tie those funding sources to how you list them. And you may not list those funding sources in the plan, but it might be a way to say, okay, we feel confident this is something we could have the resources to do.
Well, and I guess I think understanding what I was thinking, where would I put that? And I think in the implementation section itself, where you begin to talk about that, and not necessarily in the core of the text of the full plan and recommendation.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to do. But I think as we understand that implementation chart, that definitely means we should be getting back to that on some type of a basis. So if the CSAs aren't shifting, our implementation table is morphing and shifting. It's the 23 version, 24 version, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly,
It's another way to look at it. I think that takes pressure off of opening everything back up in the plan if it's not warranted.
Yeah, I agree. I see those as two like distinct things. Like, I don't know what's common, but to me, an implementation plan seems like something you could update on pretty regularly, versus the rest of the objectives would kind of stay.
And I think, it'd be good to have some prioritization and then get feedback. You've got to start somewhere. And just to have that there, and then especially with the community meetings that you're going to have, that would be the first thing I'd be asking us at the community. Well, what are we going to do first?
And I think if we've identified something as being short and reasonably understand what short term is, I think at least for that short term list, understanding we feel that this is the accomplishable time frame and these are the elements, that would even be a focus point for broader conversation about prioritizing that short term list.
And I think as you go out to different communities, they may have and what the priorities are too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I think we list them all. And again, depending on what the initiative you're looking to address and looking at audience, other things, your set of priorities will be different than potentially somebody else's. But what's the framework we have to begin to do that?
Right. And we could be prioritizing different things for the Northland versus the South.
Hence why I think you're seeing us being short, saying this is something that is short term and recommended to saying that, and different why necessarily you may not see the level of prioritization that might expect. I think depends upon the conversation and the context and the initiative, but understood what you're wanting us to do to the fullest extent possible.
I think maybe just to my earlier question about, is there an advisory group for this? And I know it's always hard when you think, okay, I have to run a committee for 20 years. But I think if you could maybe think about.
Don't ask me.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Sadowski, was I understanding that as being a volunteering moment for yourself?
So I'm like, okay, how do we turn this into a task force? So I'm thinking, like, if you were able to think about this plan as, this is the plan, we all agreed on it, we had this robust process, but this implementation piece is so tricky that every, I don't know, every 3 years, every 5 years, whatever it is, you kind of come back to that and say, is this still relevant to what we thought it would be? And that task force could be.
And,
the group
and this
that
is
could-
a similar consideration I could only imagine will happen, obviously, when the council looks at this in its entirety as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, understanding what that framework is for coming back.
And, not only is it still applicable, what have we done in that 3-year period
Yeah,
going forward?
yeah.
Some of the measures that you going to be really critical to keep on keeping everybody's nose to the grindstone of.
Well, I think certainly as a minimum, identifying how you could look at priority and what would implementation structure look like in the document itself.
Yeah.
To be fair to anybody who's serving in any of these roles, nobody has a 20-year appointment. So sometimes it has to be something that is indicated in the document that the decision makers at that time understand this is a system that they will utilize. And then with the hope that they have worked to get that process so ingrained that even if they transition into new roles, there's a community expectation of what's going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for all of your work and everything you've done for this plan and put together. Very impressive. That's a great document, I think, so far, and we look forward to seeing it as you get it finished. Thank you, commissioners, for listening to the presentation, your input, your review, your comments. I think they're all very well appreciated to make sure that we have a great plan as we move forward. So thank you for your efforts as well. Any other final thoughts, Commissioner Beasley, before we end this? I guess conclude our meeting.
I'd like to thank the planning department for all the education they provide for us. I'm specifically looking at the planning magazine that we get. There's an actual article in here dealing with the short-term rentals that has been in discussion with council. So thank you for educating us as much as you have.
Okay, so with that, we appreciate that, and I guess that ends our docket item number 1. Is there anything else to be brought before the commission today? Any thoughts from any of the commissioners?
Good session. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We thank you for the time and the attention and the great comments.
Yep, thank you. All right, so with that, motion to adjourn the meeting here.
I'll move.
All right, we'll see you in a couple of weeks here.
Thank you all. Good work.
Yep, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.